not if it can be helped. She calls me a hypocrite, which hurts, and she selects other choice insults, so I try to deflect the conversation by telling her about the Children of the Cross. It works for me, but not for Lana. "So, you've met Christ?" she asks. "Apparently. But you weren't converted?" "No, I find them fascinating, but not convincing." "But why don't you join them?" Lana's tone is not one I have heard before. "After what I've told you about Vince and Philip, I don't know why you'd ask. By joining their little cult, you could pass off all your troubles on to God, as Vince has." "I can't speak for Vince," I say, "but my interest in them is only that, an interest." "But you used the word fascinating, so it's more than an interest, isn't it? Why don't you return to the happy-clappy brigade in the Lake District? Maybe Christ can perform a miracle and save you from going to jail, or perhaps your newfound faith will support you in prison, while I'm left on the outside trying to cope on my own." "I understand you're worried," I say. "You know nothing about me. You're so wrapped up in being you and your problems, you don't consider mine." "I didn't realize you felt that way." "Exactly. You didn't realize." She's glaring at me. "Have you ever given 1 second's thought to how your bombshell affects me?" "Yes." "Have you? Have you really?" I pause, hoping to diffuse the situation. "I've thought about it every day since we first got together," I tell her. "I know I considered it on that morning when I came downstairs and you were in my dressing gown, making breakfast. But I hoped that if I said nothing to anyone, not even you, then I might, just might, be able to get away with it. I wanted us to live our lives without it ever coming out." "How wrong you were. I wasn't to know Vince would turn up. It was inevitable it would come out eventually." "No, it wasn't. It's bad luck that Vince found God, that he—" "I've been considering what you told me," she says, and there is anger in her eyes, so I stop attempting to vindicate myself. "If you report yourself to the police," she says, "that's the end of us." "What do you mean? You'll leave me?" While I am sitting there, she gets up, takes my plate and throws the food in the bin. She doesn't answer me, and I keep quiet, not wanting to upset her any more than I have done already. I watch Lana go into the hall, hear her take a coat, and she leaves the house. I always knew my world would fall apart one day, but it doesn't make it any easier to bear. I wash up, feeling angry, wondering when Lana might return and how her mood will be. An hour later, when she still hasn't come back, I resolve to look for her. If the tide is out, I'm sure she will be on the beach, but I see her standing at the far end of the pier, staring at the horizon. I am within 20 feet of Lana when I stop, worried. I don't know what I should say, how I can put things right. As I am standing, worrying, she turns and sees me. Then she looks away again, and I have no choice but to walk up to her and lean over the rail. "I knew you were there," she says. "I'm psychic, remember?" I don't reply, and she says, "Saltburn has always meant safety and security. I told you that when I first stayed the night at your house. I had a fantastic childhood here, growing up on Opal Street with loving parents and great friends. Primary school was fun, and even secondary school was okay because I was bright. Not too bright. Good-looking, but not too good-looking. And then everyone moved out of Saltburn, including me, and I met Harrison, and it all became horrible, and I hated my life, and I tried to kill myself." "You never told me that." "I didn't want to discuss what went on between me and Harrison. Most of the time I was with him, I was fantasizing about getting on a National Express coach to London. I thought I'd change my name, sell my jewellery, get a job where no questions would be asked. All kinds of unrealistic scenarios. I spent a lot of my days thinking over different ways of escaping him, but I never had the nerve to do so. But you did get away. Yes, and I met up with you, and I thought he is a decent, honourable, uncomplicated man who will treat me with some respect. I say nothing about the less than stunning endorsement. I moved back to Saltburn into your lovely house on Sapphire Street, and life became good again. Wonderful even, until Vincent Reynolds came along and revealed my perfect man, my Elliot, to be a murderer. Even Harrison, for all his faults, never killed anyone. I have to stop myself from interrupting. I said earlier that you going to the police would be the end of us. You did. I'm sorry. Apart from contradicting what I said before, I was behaving exactly as Harrison used to. It's okay. No, it's not. It's how you get somebody to do something by scaring them, making them believe they're in the wrong, causing them to doubt themselves when they're right. It's emotional blackmail rather than two people talking honestly. I'm about to ask, so that's how it was between you and Harrison, but she needs no prompting. I remember how it was on the first day I went home on my own to the new house Harrison and I had bought in Yarm. I stood there at the front door, the key in the lock, but I couldn't make myself turn it. I couldn't go in. The house was mine and Harrison's, but I asked myself, was it what I wanted? It was too far out of Newcastle for a start, too isolated, too big, too empty, and soon I would be trapped inside it, just me and him. For the first time, I realised what it meant, not only to be living in that particular house on that day, but perhaps for the rest of my life. And I'd agreed to live a life I didn't want because he talked me into it, bullied me into it, making me think it was what I wanted. So what did you do? I turned the key, opened the door, and went in. And the next day I was standing unhappily on my own doorstep once more, and I went in, and again the next day. It all started long before I met you. I returned to the house in Yarm, even though it was a prison, and I continued to put up with Harrison. He said he loved me, and I'm sure he did in his own way, but his jealousy was out of control. I couldn't go anywhere or do anything without him questioning me. He claimed that I was free to have my own friends, but I wasn't, not at all. If I said I was going out, he'd insist on knowing who, where, when. Mainly, he asked why wasn't I content to be with him. What were my ulterior motives? If I didn't do what Harrison wanted, he would say it was the end of our relationship, and I didn't want to lose him. I loved him. At least, I did at the start, or thought I did. I wouldn't jeopardize everything I had over something unimportant, like a night out with friends, not when it upset him so much. I thought, if I give him long enough, he'll calm down and act reasonably. Lana stares at me and asks, why am I telling you all this when I've always insisted I don't want to discuss him? You were feeling bad about what you said to me. Yes, I was. And I suppose I'm trying to justify myself. My way of handling what happened between me and Harrison has been to forget about it. But that doesn't mean the scars aren't still there. No, not scars. They're open wounds. I understand, I say. Although I wish you'd never found out about my own past, I feel relieved there's no longer the secret between us. I want to tell you about Harrison, so I can show you how horrible my life was, and how much better it is now. I want you to appreciate how important all that we have together is to me, and how I don't want to lose it. And if I'm to be completely honest, it means that all the time we're talking, I haven't lost you. You are not going to the police station. I give her a hug, which she reciprocates. "I met Harrison when I was 18, she explained. "I was footloose and fancy-free. My parents had moved to Aberdeen for my dad's work, and they asked me to accompany them. But I wanted my independence. They said I was too young, and I was, but I was also stubborn, and we fell out over it. I found myself a clerical job at the university and rented a flat in Jesmond. I was going to clubs with friends most nights. Although they weren't particularly good friends, I was enjoying life. And then Harrison appeared. And you mustn't take this the wrong way, but he was ever so handsome and such a catch. He drove a Maserati and owned a nightclub. Every girl I knew fancied him, and then, one night, he came up, clicked his fingers, and to my shame, I jumped. Looking back, I can see he always treated me like shit, but I didn't care at first. He saw other women, but neither of us had made any vows. I would stay the night at his house in Eaglescliffe, and it was so nice compared to my flat. Then I'd stay the whole weekend. Over time, I kind of moved in. I'm not sure quite when it officially happened. Perhaps it was the day I forgot to keep up the rent on my own place. I never cleared it out or returned the keys. I didn't ask Harrison what he did at work, besides, running a nightclub. I didn't want the details of what it might entail. Back then, he was negotiating to buy the bingo hall. When his business associates came around, I put my hands over my ears and went, "La la la la, can't hear you," as they talked about giving somebody a beating, or when they torched someone's car. I think they might have also burnt down another nightclub. It was frightening, but exciting. I was a gangster's moll, but nobody ever got murdered. "I'm sorry," she says. "I wasn't making any comparison with what you did." I ask her to continue. "At first, I was the jealous one, worried because Harrison had other women. I'd go to the club with him, even when I grew sick of the place. But after a while, without me noticing, the roles were reversed and he became dependent on me. His jealousy came to dwarf anything I might feel. If I talked about friends, past or present, he'd ask me why I was bringing them up, especially if they were male. If we went out shopping and a good-looking bloke walked by, I'd have to stare at the ground so Harrison couldn't accuse me of lusting after them. I had to give up my job, as he asked. Why did I want to work and get paid so little when he earned so much? It must be because I wanted to be away from him, or because I preferred the company of others, particularly men. We fought all the time, and he made me believe he wasn't in the wrong. I was. After all, we only ever argued over my mistakes. I did want other company, not sexually, but the idea upset him, and the last thing I wanted to do was hurt him. It became easier not to give him cause to worry or grounds for accusation. So I began staying at home all day. I didn't go anywhere on my own, and I didn't even enjoy going out with him. And I made excuses for him, to myself and to others. I ended up snubbing people, losing my friends. It was for the best because I didn't want to inflict my misery on anyone else. Anyway, people started to give us both a wide berth. Even then I knew all this stemmed from Harrison's lack of self-confidence. Nobody realised. They couldn't see past the bravado, but I could. He was insecure, afraid, worried people hated him, that they only looked up to him because they wanted a slice of what he had. He didn't trust anybody. It wasn't just me. I stayed with him although he was unbearable because I thought I was the one person who understood him and could make it all right.
It sounds like you're making excuses.
Not excuses. I'm giving reasons for his behaviour, and mine. You couldn't return to your parents? In Aberdeen? No. That would have meant admitting failure. How did the relationship with Harrison end? My only remaining friend was Rosie, and I saw too little of her. She stuck by me, even when I was being awkward and miserable. The photography course was her idea, an excuse to get away from Harrison for a few hours each week. He and I had an almighty fight about that, or rather many fights. Rosie gave me the courage to stand up to him, but he would only agree to me attending if he could take me there and pick me up afterwards. He had to know who else was on the course. He was convinced I was in love with our tutor, and he even questioned me about you when he saw us talking one day after class. In fact, it was then that I decided I'd had enough. You were just a bloke I got on with. I wanted nothing from you, and yet he seemed to think... Anyway, I didn't care what happened to me any longer. I couldn't see anything in the future except more misery, because he would never let me go. I was scared of him, and there was nowhere for me to run. And so I went to Newcastle the next day, and I threw myself off the high-level bridge. Shit! I don't remember anything about it. Not travelling into Newcastle, not climbing over the side of the bridge and jumping. Some people in a passing boat saw me, and a woman pulled me out of the water. She must have taken a life-saving course because I was told that my heart stopped for a while. I woke up in hospital and felt as though I'd been run over by a steamroller. I gave them Harrison's name as my partner, but he never came to see me. One of his associates dropped by and said Harrison wanted nothing to do with the woman who'd tried topping herself. All of my stuff, and it didn't amount to much, was dumped beside my hospital bed. Harrison wouldn't let me go home. He changed the locks. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Rosie gave me a bed at her place and arranged for some counselling. She helped me find a job, put down a deposit on a flat for me, took me back to the photography course. I never told you why I had 6 months away. I didn't tell anyone, because, well, I was mortified by what I had done. And when you and I got together, I said nothing to you, because what we share here, in Saltburn, is so good. I didn't deserve it, but I had a second chance. We return home and make love, tenderly, unhurriedly, and lie in bed afterwards, drifting in and out of sleep. Lana gives me a shove when I start snoring, and later I shove her, even though her own heavy breathing is barely audible. I don't snore. She is indignant. Of course you do, though you do it beautifully. Suddenly she looks sad, and I ask what's wrong. Why is it that when I'm happy, distressing stuff always seems to haunt me? Like what? I haven't told you everything about me and Harrison. Do you want to? I don't know. She turns and looks up at the ceiling, saying, I might as well tell you now. No more secrets. I am afraid it will be something really horrible, but say to myself I have to think of her feelings, not my own, no matter what she reveals. After my suicide attempt, when I was informed Harrison didn't want me, I can't remember exactly the words used, but I was too much of a liability, and I frightened him. I can't quite believe that after all that happened, and what he had done, what he had driven me to, that I wanted him to take me back. Fear of the unknown. Perhaps. I lay on the hospital bed and it felt like all my bones were broken. It wasn't just the fall into the water that had done the damage. But as I lay there, I decided I would go back to Harrison, despite everything, although I don't think he ever meant to hurt me. You're making excuses for him again. I am, and I shouldn't. I went to the house in Yarm, even though I hated it. I got down on my knees and pleaded with him through the letterbox. How low had I fallen? I kiss her shoulder and assure her it is all in the past. She calls me her saviour, and I give her my blessing. She asks for spiritual healing, and we make love again. We stay in bed, snuggled up together. The phone rings 3 times, and we ignore it. But when we finally get up, and I check for messages, 2 are from Margaret,
and she can wait. Another is from Tom, asking if we're going out to Middlesbrough with him and Rosie again. I take Lana out to dinner, and we don't discuss Harrison or Vince. We deliberate visiting Barcelona and reminisce about our trips abroad, both for the Persimmon Press and on proper holidays. My favourites are New England and Reykjavik. Hers, New York and Paris. All the while, though, at the back of my mind is the thought that the police will now know about me and Vince at Thirsk Airfield, and I realise that Lana is thinking the same thing. I know I should have gone to them myself already, but wonder if it will make any real difference in the long run. When we are at home again, it is late, and my office is dark, which means I can see from outside the door that the answer phone light is not flashing to indicate any new calls. I dream again that night, or rather, I am dreaming moments before the alarm goes off in the morning. I tell Lana, "You were on the pier, but I couldn't get onto it and join you. I couldn't find where it joined the beach, although I ought to have known. So I went into the ticket office of the Vernacular Railway, and there, taking the money, was the moon-faced woman." "What moon-faced woman?" "She was on our train, coming back from Middlesbrough after the nightclub a couple of weeks ago. She seems to have worked her way into my unconscious." "I think you can throw Yarrow's dream diary away," she says as she gets up. "I stupidly thought we might work out what was wrong, but you knew all the time, didn't you?" It doesn't get the day off to a good start. At breakfast, I put effort into chopping up fruit and adding various seeds to the shop-bought muesli. Halfway through eating hers, Lana puts down her spoon and looks up at me. "I dream about Harrison, you know," she says evenly. "Nearly every night. I'd be surprised if you didn't." We both return to our cereal, when there is a knock at the door. Lana and I look up at each other and say, "Shit," simultaneously. As I leave the room, I can hear her muttering, "Fuck, fuck, fuck." However, it is only a parcel for Lana that requires a signature. At least, I assume it's for Lana. She will be annoyed because it is addressed to Mrs. Elliot Barton. I rush back to reassure Lana it was not the police. She is leaning against the sink, and the fear doesn't leave her eyes when I explain it is okay. It was just a parcel. "Will it always be like this?" she asks. "Reporting the shooting would put an end to it." She nods and turns away from me, staring out of the window to where our cat, Murakama, is engaged in a standoff with another moggy in our yard. "Go to the police station this morning while I'm at work," she says. "Visit Brightman's first, if you have to, but don't call me till you know what's happening." Chapter 19. October 2006. As I enter the solicitor's offices, Mrs. Carmichael, who normally deals with my building society account, looks up from behind her desk. She says brightly, "Hello, Elliot. How are you?" I'm noncommittal. I ask if I can see Mr. Brightman. "Do you have an appointment?" When I say I don't, she tells me he is very busy and suggests she consults his diary. I watch her walk over to her boss's door, which is ajar, knock and enter. Although Brightman has always been Persimmon's solicitor, I only met him personally when he helped secure my tenancy of the house on Sapphire Street. We got on well then, and I imagine a scenario in which he appears looking concerned and asks me to step inside. "Can I suggest next Tuesday?" asks Mrs. Carmichael as she comes out, a diary open in front of her. I was hoping he could give me some advice right now. It is a matter of urgency. "What does it concern?" "It is rather delicate," I say, hating myself for the euphemism. I am still trying to hide what I have done from the world, a pointless exercise if I am to be making a confession. But then Mrs. Carmichael relents and says she's sure Mr. Brightman will spare me a few minutes. I don't dare hope that maybe, finally, I can share my story with somebody who will help me. Moments later, the man is shaking my hand and asking after my well-being. Mr. Brightman is big and square, reassuringly well-built, if slightly intimidating. He closes the door after us so we can have privacy. I sit on the other side of the desk from the solicitor, and the framed certificates on his wall remind me of my old headmaster's office. But I am no longer 14, and I am in more trouble than I could have ever imagined at that age. I say, I would like your advice and possibly your representation. I meant to be going to the police to confess a crime. Mr. Brightman waits for more information, and though I am cautiously optimistic, it is difficult to talk. The arrangement should be that the man opposite will fight on my side, and I am desperate that Mr. Brightman's legal expertise might reveal the situation to be not as bad as I have always expected. I tell him, back in 1988, I shot a man. I'm certain I killed him. Brightman stops me. Before you say anything more, why do you want to make such an admission now? Because there was a witness, and he has just given a statement to the police himself. Has he told you why? To ease his conscience, I think. Do you know the reason he hasn't spoken until now? He recently found God. I have little interest in Vince's conversion. Philip and the Children of the Cross have all been a strange distraction. I realise I should have gone to the police myself when it happened, I continue, and if it wasn't for this witness coming forward, I wouldn't have talked to anybody. But I can see it would be good to get it out in the open, to ease your conscience. After all these years, I am not sure I have ever had a conscience in this matter. I experience remorse whenever I hurt anyone else, of course, but I have never felt guilty about the man I shot, only scared I might be found out. I've not experienced guilt because I have been too angry. Vince and I were trespassing, and we shouldn't have picked up the guns, but I continue to feel outraged that the man walked in on us, that somehow he made me pull the trigger. I sigh as I remember he did no such thing. There was no legal or moral justification for shooting him, whoever he was. My only reasonable excuse, fear, surprise, stupidity. None of these absolve me in any way. There is no argument that shifts the ultimate blame away from myself. Mr. Brightman nods, misinterpreting my sigh, I am convinced. He asks me to tell him my story, and I do so relatively unemotionally. It is as though I have been rehearsing my statement forever. When I have finished, Mr. Brightman goes through what I have said, suggesting I need not mention specific details that could incriminate me. But that's why I'm here, I tell him. You could have reported the shooting without consulting a solicitor first, he points out. I assume you are talking to me because you wish to minimize the potential repercussions, while making the central admission. If you really wish to do so, but I advise you not to offer any more than the minimum information. There is one other thing I must tell you. This witness claims he pulled the trigger, not me. But you want to contradict him? Yes, because he's wrong. If they found the gun, the fingerprints on it are mine. Mr. Brightman phones ahead, and he walks down to the police station with me. His professional confidence has worked on my mood, but as we walk through Saltburn together, I realise the people we pass in the street must soon know what I'm confessing to. I think of my parents. My mother will be shocked and appalled, and I hate to hurt her. But my father? No doubt this will substantiate everything he has ever thought of me. My certainty ebbs away, and I am more frightened than I have been at any time since the shooting. The detective, who has been waiting, McNish, ushers us into an interview room, and I hand over my statement with shaking hands. When he starts his questioning, he is only asking me to confirm what I've already written for him. I had forgotten to bring up the money, and I do so now.
even though Brightman cautions me not to. I'm annoyed I have to repeat the story. It reminds me once again that I am more than likely to lose my freedom, and that will mean separation from Lana. As the interview continues, I can't believe I have agreed to do this. Mr. Brightman gave me no reassurances. Any optimism has only ever existed in my imagination. I want to return home and reconsider my decision. I want the opportunity to run away and go into hiding. There is a break for a late lunch, but I cannot eat anything. It gives Mr. Brightman half an hour to try to calm me down. I tell him I would like to withdraw my statement, and he advises me I can, but we cannot now stop the police re-examining the case. When a constable, who is disconcertingly younger than me, takes my fingerprints and a DNA swab, I experience a growing desperation. We re-enter the interview room, and 2 more detectives have arrived from Middlesbrough. We have to work through the whole statement once more. I am convinced I will never again see the house of Sapphire Street. As the afternoon drags on, my earlier panic is replaced by a leaden fatalism. It makes no sense when they report that none of their colleagues have taken a statement from Vince. He has, apparently, not appeared at any police station, but whether this has always been his plan, it is best, I decide, to accept that my old life is over. If it has all been an elaborate trick by Vince, I have fallen for it. I tell myself that at least I was free for several years, but I know I have now lost everything. The prospect of not seeing Lana again pulls at my heart, but my fate is no longer in my own hands. At 5 o'clock, Brightman looks at his watch and announces it is time to end the interview. My immediate reaction is to think, it's all right for you, but to my astonishment, he says he expects me to be released. It is as though he has succeeded in a sleight-of-hand trick. The detectives put away their paperwork like tired businessmen at the close of an unimportant and tedious meeting, pleased to call it a day. They switch off the tape that has been quietly but remorselessly recording the interview, and they tell me I must make sure I'm available for questioning over the next few days, and not to travel abroad. But, as Brightman points out, even this is unenforceable until such time as they charge me. Outside the door of the police station, I phone Lana to say I'm on my way back home. After a pause, she says only, "I'll be here." Lana is sitting on the bottom tread of the stairs as I let myself into the house. I am in a state of shock, bewildered, and emotionally drained. I do not know if I should rejoice or not. Surely the police will recognize at any moment that Brightman has made idiots of them, and they will come after me. "Well?" Lana asks as I take my coat off. "It's okay," I try to reassure her, hardly daring to believe that I have this reprieve. I sit down beside Lana and tell her what happened. I am coldly factual, a manner I had adopted in the interviews, but as I end my account, in a sudden rush of relief, I release a strange sob I cannot control, and I find myself crying. I am embarrassed, but then, to my horror, I realize Lana has not attempted to put her arms around me or tried to say anything comforting. Fear returns, and this helps me pull myself together. She continues to be silent, and so I tell her, "The police didn't know anything about any statement Vince made yesterday. He didn't turn himself in after all." "The bastard," she says, and stands up. "I could call him," I suggest. "He's fooled you into confessing when he never intended to. His claim to have pulled the trigger was all a ruse. Possibly, I don't know. But you," she says. I make myself wait for her to complete the accusation. Instead, she asks, "Did they really tell you, go away?" "Yes, because they're not ready to charge me." "When might they do that?" "Later tonight or tomorrow. As they don't have Vince's statement, it could take weeks. In the meantime, we can carry on with our daily lives." And how the fuck do we do that?
With difficulty, but somehow we get by with the threat of arrest hanging over me. We don't argue, but then again we talk little. We both go to work, and at home we wade through a couple of indifferent box sets on DVD. And then, a week later, I receive a call from Detective Inspector McNish while I'm at my desk at the Persimmon office. It is the early afternoon, and he wants me to present myself at the station in half an hour. I ask if I should bring my solicitor, and I am told I'm welcome to do so if I consider it necessary. This equivocation is my one glimmer of hope, the feeble light from a guttering candle in a storm that has recommenced after an unreal interval of calm. I am shaking, but I keep this out of my voice when I telephone Lana. She says she's coming straight home, and she makes me promise to call her as soon as anything is known. I then call Brightman before returning to the house on Sapphire Street and change into my suit, wondering if I shouldn't be setting my affairs in order. In the mirror, as I put on my tie, I look as though I'm going to a funeral. However, I remind myself the police haven't turned up on my doorstep with handcuffs. I walk around, switching appliances off before I leave. Lana can never remember the password for my computer, so I write it down for her. And I also include the security number for our bank account because she has never memorized that either. At the last minute, I add to the list I am making that the house insurance is due to be paid next week. It feels like I'm wasting time, putting off the final reckoning, but these things are important. I should have arranged them earlier. In the interview room, I expect the worst, and Mr. Brightman can't enlighten me. We are made to wait for McNish, and when he deigns to appear, I can't read his body language. The policeman takes miscellaneous papers from a manila file, rearranges them, and makes marginal notes with a troublesome biro. Brightman asks him why I have been called in.
We contacted our colleagues in North Yorkshire while you were here before, and yes, they have a record of a suspected shooting at Thirsk Airfield at exactly the date you suggest. However, if they had a bullet and samples of blood, they've lost them. There were fingerprints on file, but they've also been misplaced. There was no body, and the investigation discovered no one with gunshot injuries. We do not know if the shooting was fatal.
What does this mean? I ask. Mr. Brightman explains. You can't be charged with murder or manslaughter when there is no evidence anyone was killed.
It is possible to make a conviction without a corpse, says McNish, but we would need more than just your confession. For a start, it would be useful if we could get a statement out of Vincent Reynolds.
Has he still not made one?
No, and I don't think he will.
But he was the one desperate to confess.
McNish says, perhaps he hasn't come forward because he doesn't exist.
What? I ask. He must have had second thoughts, or maybe it was all a way of getting me to own up.
Or, McNish says patiently, it is because there is no Vincent Reynolds.
Why would I invent him?
You tell me.
I'm sure you can trace him.
Where would you go looking for him?
I told you, the St. Michael's Retreat at Sandwich.
We asked the Cumbria Force to send officers there, and they report the building is empty. It hasn't been used for 2 or 3 years, although it has recently been sold.
They must have gone to the wrong place.
No, they didn't. But, as an aside to our investigation, did you see any damage or vandalism while you were at St. Michael's?
No. Why?
Our colleagues suspect arson. The estate agents believe kids must have broken in, though there was no sign of forced entry. But maybe we will return to that later. You were going to say where else we might look for Vincent Reynolds.
You could try his parents. His father was a policeman.
Yes, Terence Reynolds. He retired 10 years ago and now manages a garden centre. He lost his wife last year, which was a double tragedy for the poor man.
Double?
His son, Vincent Reynolds, disappeared in 2001. He was travelling in Nigeria, apparently. Nobody knows quite what happened. His father even went out there to investigate and nearly got killed himself. It can be a dangerous country if you travel alone and you poke around asking awkward questions. Anyway, Terence Reynolds resisted the inevitable for some years, but his son was officially declared dead 12 months ago. I am unable to say anything. McNish continues. Vincent Reynolds was associated with the Children of the Cross. Several other members of the church also disappeared under mysterious circumstances at the same time as he did. They were one of those cults that believed the world would end in the year 2000. When they were proved wrong, they did the decent thing and they were wound up in 2002. They had churches in London and most of the other major European cities. We haven't looked into them in any great detail, but their support collapsed in Europe. In Africa, they reinvented themselves as some brotherhood or other that does good works and doesn't make extravagant claims about the apocalypse. None of this makes sense. I agree. Which means my client can leave, says Brightman. Yes, although we are seriously considering charging him with wasting police time. I return home a few minutes after Lana does, and I tell her there will be no criminal proceedings against me. We hug for a long time, then cry, and it takes a while for us both to calm down. I pour myself some wine, and Lana shakes her head when I offer her a glass. I am so sorry, I say. I know, she replies. I want to slap you again. I want to smash crockery, but what good will it do? I feel... Yes? Empty. No, that's not true. I don't know how I feel. It's as if somebody has ripped out my heart and stamped on it and put it back saying, there, now get on with everything as though nothing happened. We could have a pact to never mention any of this ever again. It's tempting to try, but can we do that? There are too many unanswered questions. Like what the fuck was Vince Reynolds doing coming here and turning our world upside down? I tell her Vince is meant to be dead and that the Children of the Cross no longer exists. But this is ludicrous, she says. We met a ghost, did we? I'd swear he was real enough. A con man, perhaps. Cheating us out of what? You were convinced he was your old school friend. Yes, and why wouldn't he have been? Other people must have been aware of our interest in religion, pseudo-religion, etc., but nobody else knew about the airfield and the books, and certainly nothing of the shooting. Lana opens her laptop saying, I'm going to research this disappearing church of holy fucking fruitcakes. There must be something. I'd have been content to bury recent events just as I'd buried it before. Perhaps it might be easier now. After all, I have made a full confession and I still seem to be a free man. But at that moment, all I want to do is keep Lana happy. When she is online, looking up Vince's church, I recall he had given me his old business card. I ask Lana if she's seen it because I don't appear to have kept it. No, she says, look in your office. It is not there, so I check in the address book by the phone in the hall, and among the papers on the kitchen counter that serves as the household in tray. What I do find is the parcel that arrived for Mrs. Elliot Barton, special delivery, a few days earlier, and it is sealed. I forgot all about it, she says, and opens the packet while reading what she has found on screen. I go into the hall for a second time and finally locate Vince's card in my jacket pocket. I don't remember putting it there. Vincent Reynolds, Representative, United Utilities, Northwest. I call the handwritten number for the retreat, but it is not available. Then I try the printed number that has been crossed out. It is within office hours, but it is ages before a man with a Liverpudlian accent answers. Vincent Reynolds doesn't work for us, he says,
after asking somebody else. "I'd like to talk to your personnel department." "I'll put you through to human resources," he says. When I get through to a rather friendlier woman, she reports the same thing. "Reynolds no longer works here." "Can you tell me when he left?" "I'm not allowed to give out that information." "He's an old school friend. It's personal, regarding a family bereavement." The lie comes easy, and I elaborate. "I realise it is a long shot, but I've got a card here that he gave me in 2001. I hear her tapping on a keyboard, and she tells me, after a pause, "I'm very sorry, but according to our records, your friend stopped working for United Utilities in 2001. Wait, there's a note saying he died in 2005. She apologises for being the bearer of bad news. I thank her and put the phone down. In the kitchen, Lana says, "Let me tell you what I came up with online, which is probably what the police discovered. The Children of the Cross were disbanded in 2002. I unearthed it on a Beware Cults website, but with lots of dead links. Searching deeper, I found another site called Nederland News, and a story about a woman in 2005 who said Philip Alderwicki, their leader, presumed dead, had come to her in a dream and told her where she could recover her missing children. There's a further one where a woman claims she died and he resurrected her. We really are moving into Houston territory." "But," she says, "what do you make of this?" She hands me the special delivery package that arrived a week before. The return address is written in a spidery hand, which is very hard to read. It appears to say Ovenden, Butts Lane, Thirsk. I don't say anything, but when I remove the contents, I can't help letting out a "shit." "Who the fuck is Christopher Ovenden?" asks Lana. My old religious teacher has sent a half-dozen duplicated sheets of paper depicting Bible scenes, each of which is meticulously coloured in with felt-tip pen. For a moment, I wonder if my teacher has returned my schoolwork, but it is too well done, keeping neatly inside the lines. Even more impressive, to the child in me, is the lack of overlapping penwork where large areas have been filled in. The paper also looks far too new. I can still smell something, faintly, of whatever chemicals are used in felt-tip pens. The accompanying letter reads, "Dear Mrs. Barton, please forgive an old man his rudeness in sending you the enclosed samples of his art. A friend of your husband, Vincent Reynolds, came to see me recently and was kind enough to suggest your gallery might be interested. I assume it is too conventional and Christian for modern tastes, but he said I should offer you the chance of exhibiting it. I estimate I have 200,000 items you would be free to choose from. Yours sincerely, Christopher Ovenden." When I look at Lana, she says, "Don't stare at me like that. I don't know who he is." "Mr. Ovenden was one of my teachers. I won't have mentioned that I got him sacked." "No, you don't talk about your school days, remember? And with good reason. Are there any more revelations?" "Not very thrilling ones," I say, and I give Lana the briefest outline of what happened when I questioned Mr. Overden's authority and he sent me to the headmaster for being insubordinate. At least, that is the word I recall him using. It was said by others afterwards that the headmaster and the governors were looking for an excuse to get rid of him. It sounds like he took all of his sheets of paper home and continued colouring them in himself, and has never stopped if he now has 200,000 of them. He must have lost his marbles, but he's put more care into these than we ever did. I can see they are simple, duplicated designs, but he has added detail himself. A scene of Jesus preaching on the top of a mountain has been embellished by cumulonimbus clouds not outlined in the original design. And rather than being limited to 8 or 9 primary colours, as we had been, he has a palette of 20 or 30 different pens. "We should visit him," says Lana.
You can't be serious. He's met Vincent Reynolds. I know, but all the same. Perhaps I ought to return to the police. Ovenden will tell them I wasn't wasting their time. I'd recommend you discuss Ovenden with them if they come back to you. How old would this man be? 70? 80? I can't be sure. When you're a teenager, all teachers appear ancient. But realistically, he must have been in his 50s when he taught me. There is a phone number, and Lana calls, but does not receive an answer. We spend the night online drinking and forgetting or not wanting to eat, but discover little about the Children of the Cross we do not already know. I unearth an article, quite a scholarly one, that discusses them as though they continue to exist, and it has links to their website, which, naturally, is no longer available. Later, Lana comes across the Internet Archive, which was taking snapshots of web pages as far back as 1996. After a great deal of lateral thinking, we find that the Children of the Cross website had an alternative name then, but was up and running in 1998. Most of the site appears to have slabs of text quoting interminable sermons by Philip and his bishops, but it gives addresses and contact details. Frustratingly, the text was saved as a part of the archive, but few of the images are still available for viewing. But then, Lana finds one of Philip. "Is this your man?" she asks, turning her laptop around so I can see the screen. Philip Odowiki is standing against what looks like red silk, and his hand is raised as though blessing something or someone just out of shot. "It's a bit grainy," I tell her, "but I'm confident it's him." A few moments afterwards, she unearths a further photo on another archived page. It's smaller and even less clear, and is of a crowd of men and women, mostly black, but there are 2 white faces. She points and says, "That's Vince Reynolds." She is right. It is unmistakably Vince. "But we aren't the only ones to have met him since his death," she says. "There's also a retired religious knowledge teacher." Lana gets up the next morning before I do. By the time I am downstairs, there are sausage sandwiches ready and a pot of tea brewing. She announces, "I've talked to Mr. Ovenden, and we're visiting him on Tuesday. Is there anything to be gained by it? Until we see him, who knows? But he confirmed that he had a visit from Vince last week, and I've been online this morning investigating the addresses on the Children of the Cross's former website. The names have been blurred out, but I'm fairly certain that when Google sent their cameras around Europe, the Children of the Cross were no longer resident at any of them. How about the retreat at Ullswater? I was waiting for you to get out of bed so I could ask exactly where it is." "Sandwick." She looks it up while I start on my sandwich. Having had nothing to eat the previous night, I find that I am ravenous. "Is this the one?" she asks, showing me on screen. I recognize the road and the gate, but the sign appears new and not at all how I remember it from my visit. There is also a for sale board erected by Dacre and Jones. Lana finds the estate agent's website, where St. Michael's House is described as having formerly been a conference centre, but with the potential for conversion to a hotel or substantial private dwelling. It is marked as sold, and the price is not available. Finding no other avenues to investigate, Lana suggests we should drive to Sandwick. Without tidying up after breakfast, we leave the house and walk to the garage, where they will let us hire the same car as I had before. We buy bottles of water. We are both suffering slight hangovers. As we are heading west, Lana drives. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I ask, although I realize she is determined. Lana explains, "It's important to know we've looked into this as far as we are able. Only then can we put it behind us." She is resolute, single-minded even. I have never seen Lana like this. She worries me, but I say nothing because I'm worried how she might reply.
She appears to be controlling an anger I hope is not directed at me. Once we are on the A66, travelling across the Pennines, the traffic is light, and it ought to be like a holiday. I struggle to find anything to say that doesn't sound trite, and the minutes pass by without us talking. After a while, Lana says, "You don't want to explore this, do you?" "I'm happy to leave it alone," I agree. "I mean, what happens if we arrive and meet Vince and he has some perfectly legitimate reason for not having made his statement yet? I have to understand why he was willing to destroy our lives and then backed off." "Do you remember the wartime mine that was washed up on Saltburn Beach a few years ago?" I ask. "The person who found it said they gave it a good kick, not understanding what it was. Then they had their suspicions, and a bomb disposal team took it away and blew it up in a controlled explosion. Well, I feel like that person, as though in the last few days I've kicked the mine and miraculously it hasn't gone off. I don't want to risk kicking it again." "I understand," says Lana. "Honestly, I do. All I need to do is look at it. I won't kick anything, I promise." Lana negotiates the car carefully down the narrow lane to the gate of the retreat. The sign isn't the same as the one I had seen on my previous visit. It is the board visible on Google Earth. When we get out of the car, we discover the for sale sign thrown down on the inside of the fence. As we are considering walking up the driveway to the house, a tractor engine is fired up in the farmyard opposite, and as it starts to drive away, I wave for the driver to stop. He confirms that the retreat has been unoccupied for several years, although he does admit to having seen cars going in and out occasionally. He assumes these would have been the estate agents and potential purchasers. "Will anyone mind if we look around?" I ask. "It doesn't bother me," he says, "but I know nothing about it." He shuts the door of the cab and drives noisily off. We leave our car by the farm entrance, cross the lane and climb the padlock gate. Walking to the house, we find the whole place looking uncared for and not at all as I remember it. The lawns have reverted to wilderness, although I can still make out the old rose bushes with blighted and rusted leaves. Grass pushes up through the tarmac in an uneven ribbon along the middle of the driveway. The building itself has slates slipped and missing on the roof, and the walls are shrugging off the stained render and flaking paint. There are weeds in the gutters, and an overflow pipe is dripping into a black pool on mossy stone flags. When we peer through the first window we come to, the shadowy room beyond appears to be empty. "I think that was the library," I say, but I am no longer sure of anything. "If this was Saltburn," says Lana, "they'd have boarded up all the windows to stop people breaking in." The glass is covered with a fine layer of dirt. I draw a heart on it and add our initials. "If you were going to prison," says Lana, "I'd insist on you getting that tattooed on your arm." We could have had one each. No, I wouldn't need to, but you could have killer in Gothic lettering across your chest. As she says this, Lana looks uncomfortable and suggests we move on. The next few windows are strangely blacked and unevenly smudged from the inside, as though smeared with something unpleasant. We cannot see through them properly, and I remember one of the detectives from Middlesbrough talking about arson. Other windows give us a view of the kitchen, which has work surfaces and appliances in place, but nothing to indicate it is in use. We go around the back, and the windows are smaller and reveal just as little. At the far end of the building, we can see what might have been a lounge, and then several of the cell-like bedrooms. We have circled the entire building, and I still cannot explain why it is now so run down and badly maintained. The natural hollow in which the grounds are set is being reclaimed by the gorse encroaching from the hills, while the lawns are thick with rank growing grass and weeds. As I am looking around, Lana retraces her steps, going out of sight. After a few moments, I follow her, wondering what she is doing, but before I can turn the corner, I hear something smash. "You can't do that," I say, running up to her as she carefully pulls shards of broken glass out of a window frame. "It was like it when I found it," she lies. Once through the window, we are in a bedroom, and the door opens into a corridor. When we find the centre of the house, I recognise the Inglenook fireplace. The inside of the building is not only darker, but it feels much smaller than last time. We go up the staircase and down the corridor to what had been, for one night, my bedroom. There are no longer any carpets, and on the floorboards there is a gritty layer of dust and dirt in which we were the first to leave prints. "Are you sure this is where you stayed?" Lana asks. "I'm convinced of it." "But look, the wall is mildewed. It can't have been like this a week ago, or you'd have noticed." It didn't, and yes, I'd have seen it. As we are leaving the room, I remember taking my mobile phone out of my pocket and not getting a signal. I turn around and crouch down, peering along the gaps between the floorboards. I finally see what I am looking for, although it has dust on its edge. "What is it?" asks Lana. "A pound coin." "How can you tell?" "Because I dropped it there." We walk down to the hall, and I suggest we investigate the refectory. It is dark inside, and the smell of soot is nearly overpowering. The light through the windows is mottled and stained. "The police said there had been a fire," I tell Lana. "Everything has been scorched. It looks as though there has been an explosion, but nothing actually ignited. Blackened curtains hang crookedly at the windows. The remains of chairs and tables have been thrown to the sides of the room, along with other, smaller singed items that are now hard to identify. Kicking amongst them, I see charred prayer books. But what attracts me is the shape on the far wall, where the great wooden cross had previously stood. The paintwork had been protected, and the symbol of the Christian church is eerily outlined, appearing to glow in the tainted half-light. The wooden cross itself is not to be seen. Chapter 20. October 2006. I haven't been to Thirsk since I ran away from home 18 years ago. Driving there is not quite as I remember it, although I ought to know the geography of the northeast well. I've always given the town a wide berth, aware of its presence on the map, and finding good reasons for avoiding it. Lana has respected this. It's the same with her and Diam. Following our visit to Sandwich, Lana has calmed down and become much less intense. As she drives to Thirsk, we discuss Mr. Ovenden. "You didn't let him think you were interested in his work, did you?" I ask, "not to get to talk to him about Vince?" "Well," she says, "the end justifies the means. He is obviously off his trolley. He sounded compos mentis over the phone, but I must admit to feeling awkward about what I said." "Which was?" "That his work could be considered outsider art." "You hypocrite! You're the one who's always saying it's a meaningless term." "And it is. But you can imagine how amazing it would be if, say, the Baltic Gallery displayed his 200,000 pieces of religious colouring in all in one room." "I don't want to imagine it." "I know. It would be hideous. But he said he didn't mind being thought of as an outsider. He said something about all the great prophets being outsiders." "Oh, shit. Another religious loony. You seem to attract them." I think about it. Ovenden, an outsider artist. I suppose losing his job could have pushed him over the edge, causing him to take up his felt-tip pens. "When we put the catalogue together for his first show, we'll give you the credit." We may laugh, but his work is naive, self-taught, and outside the system. In fact, he has no direct interest in the system, not if he's evangelizing for God. "But art,"
she says firmly, has to have its own intrinsic quality. His has none. But who's to judge? I can decide for myself, thank you. The trouble is, the art world is too engrossed in the story and the personalities, not the work. It is a variation on a discussion we have had many times, but we are both happy to repeat it purely for entertainment. I say no kind of art, either painting, writing, poetry, can be divorced from its creator and the circumstances surrounding its creation. The problem with outsider art is the context is everything, and the art itself is usually of secondary importance. I concede this is often true, but say it's snobbery to claim art can't exist beyond the established boundaries. Most unrecognised art doesn't deserve to hang in galleries because it isn't good enough, not because there's a conspiracy against it. Because a child or a psychiatric patient puts brush to paper doesn't mean they should be considered alongside the work of recognised, talented artists. Some of the best outsider art is incredibly detailed and beautiful. I agree, and it may be a manifestation of a mental health condition, but it is then the pathological problem of the artist that interests us, rather than their work. Most of it is like visiting Bedlam in Victorian times. Isn't that a bit harsh? I don't think so. Not when the overriding preoccupation of those in control is making money. Can we make our fortune out of discovering Christopher Ovenden? Even if we could, nobody would ever forgive us. As we drive up to Mr. Overden's house, my light-hearted mood fades and disappears completely when I see the faded signs on his front door stating, "No cold callers, sellers or hawkers, no canvassing, and neighbourhood watch." These must be displayed out of an unreasonable paranoia because, as I remember, he is living in the affluent part of a law-abiding town. Ovenden opens his door while it is still on the chain, and he asks us to identify ourselves. Only then will he let us in, grudgingly, and I want to tell him that if it's too much trouble, we can always leave. I wish I'd suggested to Lana she drive down to visit him on her own. I do realise, though, that a very old and dusty guilt is at the root of my desire to be anywhere other than on this man's doorstep. "It's wonderful to meet you," says Lana, walking in first. "Call me Chris," he says, which makes me cringe. "We will, Chris," she tells him. "Your house is in a lovely position." "It is." He turns and walks unsteadily down the hall without even acknowledging me. Lana and I exchange glances as I shut the front door. Mr. Ovenden uses a stick, and it takes a long time for him to reach the living room. Through his windows there is an impressive view over fields towards the North Yorkshire moors, but the most noticeable thing upon entering the room is the mess of paper and boxes. Everywhere there are sheets and sheets of his drawings, garish things, all a uniform A4. They are on the table, on shelves, and piled high on the floor. It is not dirty in his house, or smelly. It is just full of paper. There is the strong acid-drop sweetness of the chemicals from his pens. A waste paper basket overflows with used-up felt tips, and a dozen new packs are on his desk ready to be opened. "I'm sure I ought to remember these," I say, picking up a picture from a sheaf of drawings on a chair. It depicts two women. One is wearing a dress coloured in an electric light blue, the other a tunic of chocolate brown. Both have vibrant pink faces. "Ruth and Naomi," says Ovenden, from Ruth 1:16. I assume he will quote the Bible verse, but he doesn't. "Ever since my pupils stopped colouring these 20 years ago, I've been doing it," he says, "from here, at my table, looking out this window at God's wonderful creation." I expect him to say something about Yorkshire being God's own country, but I realise for the first time he doesn't have a Yorkshire accent. This knocks me a little off balance, but he appears to still be the same frightening man who had once sent me to the headmaster.
I would certainly have recognized him if we had met in the street, although he is older and has lost his hair. The great dome of his head is parchment, with the same liver spots that cover the back of his hands. "Well," he says to Lana, "would your gallery like to exhibit my work?" I feel uncomfortable, but Lana says, with no suggestion of embarrassment, "No, I'm afraid not." From her bag, she brings out the special delivery package containing the pictures he had posted to her. "I showed them to my colleagues," she says. "They were interested in what you were doing. They're impressed by your industry, but we don't believe we could get the public behind your art." I told Vincent Reynolds that would be the case, but you claimed I come into the category of outsider artist. "And you do," says Lana, with her best smile. "But it's an area fraught with difficulty. I'm not a complete old duffer. I use the internet. That's the source of my pictures these days," he says, waving his hand around at the room. "I looked up the term outsider artist, but even if there was any interest, and then sales, I'd not receive any money, would I? Not that I care. It's spreading the word of the Lord that's important. But I wouldn't want to be ripped off." "It can be a problem," Lana says, "and our momentary eye contact warns me not to speak." She continues, "The religious preoccupation is another. Because I am a Christian. What if I had been a Buddhist or a Sikh? That would be more politically correct, wouldn't it? Elliot Barton here, he would be more interested in that, I can tell you. He always looked down his nose at Christianity. But as for the religion of Japan, Shinto and Buddhism, I say without hesitation, certain things stay with you. We could have had this conversation over the telephone," Ovenden tells Lana. "We could, but we wanted to meet you and discuss Vincent Reynolds." "Really?" he replies. "Reynolds came to see me about his new church." "And what do you make of it?" I ask. In my professional, if prematurely retired position, I called it blasphemous self-delusion. "Nevertheless," I say, "Vince believes in it." "I know he does. He explained his faith. We had a long discussion that went all the way back to how you lost me my job. Reynolds was very sympathetic." "Was he?" "He said he'd seen you both the day before he visited me." He points a bony finger at Lana. "He mentioned you worked in an art gallery." Lana asks me, "How would Vince have known?" But Ovenden continues to talk to her. "Your husband here won't believe me. He thought I was a waste of space, and probably still does. But I remember every one of the boys who went through my class." I want to ask the obvious question. What about the girls? But Lana has already interrupted by telling him we are not married. "We are living in sin," I say, but he ignores us both. Vincent Reynolds was one of those sensitive souls looking for direction. Oh, he could be brash and stupid. They all were. But I thought he is marked out for the religious life. He wouldn't be the first I've taught who showed promise. I am desperate to say this is all nonsense, the confused memory of an old and angry man, but I am intimidated when he turns to me. Elliot Barton is a name I've never forgotten. On the way down from Saltburn, I had told Lana I would not apologize to him. Do we need to go over the past? You invited yourself here. To talk about Vincent Reynolds. Perhaps. Vincent came here to discuss the Children of the Cross, says Lana. He was here to tell me his story. He said at the time I was fired from school for not teaching religion properly. He had been deeply interested in comparative religion. Alternative religions, I say.
He was comparing all religions, new and old, trying to work out what they offered, working out why they were similarities and differences, which were right and which were wrong. He was doubtful and skeptical, but I could see that deep down he knew there was a spiritual basis to it all, a powerful spiritual basis, and he thinks he has finally found it. That's not how I remember it, I tell Overton, wondering why, after all these years, it still requires such courage. Vince and I were both interested in why people feel the need for religion, the psychological need, and how it would appear to be answered in different ways by alternative belief systems. When basic underlying requirements are met, there are bound to be correspondences between faiths. I accept, said Mr. Overton patiently. That is how it was for you. But Vince was different. He was looking for the root of it all, and discovered it in Christianity. He sought Christ, and believes he encountered him in Nigeria. Do you believe him? Mr. Overton puts his hands on his head and massages his scalp. Then he says, with words that are measured, "As I told you, I said I didn't. I'm pleased to hear it. Why? Because I've met Philip Oduwiki, the man Vince claims is Christ. I thought he was charming, but Christ? No." Overton stares at me and asks, "Would you recognize our Lord if he came knocking at your door?" "I would hope he had more to offer than Oduwiki," I say, remembering my father had once asked me the same question. He had been standing in the bathroom, his face covered in foam because he was shaving. It had been the morning of the Christian Revival meeting on the flats. There is an uncomfortable pause, and I fill it by saying, "And I'm not sure whether Philip Oduwiki believes in it himself." Vincent's Christ. If he is not the Messiah, who is he then? He's not a con man, I don't think. He doesn't appear to be a madman. He seems to be somebody who found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time and is now heralded by his disciples as the saviour of the human race. "But he's going along with it," says Lana. "Yes, and it shouldn't be too difficult for him to point out the error, if he was so inclined." "I wish I had your certainty," says Overton. "What is there to be uncertain about?" "I am a Christian, Barton, and I believe Christ will come again and gather his children together in heaven. What if I've made an appalling mistake, and this man is Christ? In that case, you should have asked for an introduction." "That is what I've been thinking." "An insurance policy?" I ask flippantly. "Pascal's wager?" "What wager?" asks Overton. "The argument that it's in your best interest to believe in God in case eternal damnation is a reality. If it isn't real, then what have you lost?" The old man sits down, looking tired. I say, "It's all very well to have second thoughts now, but Vince and Philip and the children of the cross have all disappeared off the face of the earth." "Then I am too late," he says sadly. "But your friend, Dr. Emmanuel Breeze, he wasn't my friend. You went up on stage with him and he cured you of your bone problem." "No, he didn't. He was a con man. He bullied me into getting up in front of the whole of Thirsk when there was nothing wrong with me. When I realized what he was doing, I left as quickly as I could." "And swore, I seem to remember. Not as much as I should have done." "You call him a con man. What do you think his motives were?" "Who can tell? Money, self-aggrandizement, or a greater good? Perhaps he justified the showmanship and the patter as contributing to the Lord's work, albeit in an unorthodox way." "What, by lying and cheating?" "Yes. He might have claimed that even if he tricked people into believing in God, that would be better than them not believing. So they were deceived into going to heaven."
In the long run, they would thank him. You can't be certain those were his motives? No, but Breeze was a former pupil of mine, or rather, he wasn't officially my pupil. A generation before you and Vincent Reynolds, he attended the same school. His parents were Primitive Baptists, and they came to the headmaster to say their son shouldn't take part in religious knowledge lessons. Primitive Baptists don't believe in Sunday school either. They claim it interferes with the right of parents to give religious instruction to their children. They didn't want me putting alternative ideas into his head. They were very strict. The headmaster had to agree, but everybody understands the concept of forbidden fruit, even atheists such as you, Elliot Barton. Breeze would come along to me during lunch breaks, not to receive any formal instruction, but to ask questions, to see what he was missing. The way he described the Baptist services in Northallerton made them sound dismal, hymns with no accompaniment, endless dull sermons, etc. Breeze went to the other extreme when he set up his evangelical church, what with his guitars and drums and leaping about on a stage with a microphone. Mind you, Primitive Baptists undertake full immersion baptisms. Breeze took that on board because he enjoyed the theatricality. But did he believe? I think he did, despite his behaviour, but his faith didn't stop him from being expelled in his 5th year for getting a 4th-year girl pregnant. And then there was a great furore because, at the same time, he broke into the Baptist church in Northallerton. As it was told to me, he left an outrage in the middle of their hall. An outrage? He defecated. I laugh, and Overton says pointedly, "Some people never grow up." He continues, "Breeze was in trouble with the law for a while, and he may have gone to prison. Although I couldn't say for what, I didn't ask. When he returned to Thirsk in the 1980s, he was a reformed character, intent on Christ's work. He came to me because he wanted a good word put in with the governors so he could hold services in the school hall. As you might imagine, my reference didn't carry much weight after I was fired, but he got to have his services after all." "And you think he was using the greater good argument?" "I don't know. On balance, I believe he was an impostor. I suppose I was happy to tolerate his antics for the greater good." "Perhaps Vincent Reynolds' friend, Philip, operates on the same principle. Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. Why, when you don't believe in any of it?" "I've always felt I should be able to trust the Christian," I say. "I don't understand why they should be any more reliable than non-believers." I remember that at the retreat I had not been comfortable without a lock on my door. Suddenly I am back in my parents' house, disagreeing with my father, certain I am right. But now I find myself on the wrong side of the argument as I say, when Christians commit a sin, they are being bigger hypocrites. I am arguing for the sake of it. I do not believe what I am saying. He dismisses me with a wave of his hand and turns to Lana. "I really don't know if the disappearance of the Children of the Cross is a good or a bad thing." "Why?" "Because if this man is not Christ, despite his apparent attractions, his plausibility, could he be, in fact, the devil?" We leave Mr. Overton's house soon afterwards. He takes even longer to negotiate his way down the hallway to the front door. As we are going out, we shake hands, but he does not let go. He looks me straight in the eye. "I have forgiven you," he says, after a second or two of consideration. "Thank you," I reply, and then, against my better judgment, I say, "I'm sorry about what happened." "Perhaps," he says, and releases my hand, patting my shoulder as I turn to walk away. I am annoyed for having made an apology. Lana asks to be directed around Thirsk so she can see where I grew up. She realizes I am not enthusiastic, so distracts me by asking, "What do you think of Overden's theory that Philip may be the devil?" If you believe in God and Christ, you can't ignore other aspects of Christianity just because they're uncomfortable or embarrassing. Of course you can. You change to one of the many different denominations that accommodate your specific requirements. That's why new churches are founded. Or you join the Church of England, which is content for members to view faith as a pick and mix. We are taking the circular route around Thirsk, and I point out my old house and school. The town is not much changed. It feels uncomfortably claustrophobic, and I am afraid of being recognized by people as we drive through. This is absurd. After all this time, even my father probably wouldn't know me. I'm thinking this as we reach his ironmongery shop, which is still in business, with the wheelbarrows, galvanized dustbins, and plastic water butts on the pavement. When Lana pulls into a parking space outside and turns off the engine, I ask what she's doing. We're coming to terms with the past, aren't we? No more secrets. You're going to introduce me to your father, and hopefully make peace with him while you're at it. I would have appreciated the chance to think about this. No, I know you. Given time, you'd decide against it. She has taken off her seatbelt and, checking for traffic, she gets out. I can't discuss this with her if she's not in the car, so I follow her example. I would rather not, I start to say. If anything happened between you and your father that was as bad as, or worse than, what went on at the airfield, fair enough, we'll go home now. Nothing that bad, no. So what have you got to lose? She asks, and walks up to the shop. I find I am following her, and as she reaches the door, she opens it, turns, and allows me to enter first. It is unchanged in the shop since I saw it last, which is strange. My father was always the innovator, constantly updating and renewing, but it looks old-fashioned inside. It used to feel large and bright, but now it appears small and dim. I don't know why, apart from the fact that there is dust on almost every surface. The bulbs recessed into the ceiling seem to be of a low wattage, and some have died and not been replaced. "Good morning. Can I help you?" asks a man who emerges from the rear of the shop. I am about to ask for my father when I realize it is him. "Elliot," he says, recognizing me. "Hello, Dad. To what do I owe this pleasure?" I decide to be honest. It was Lana's idea we drop in. I stand to one side to let her come forward, and I make the introductions. They shake hands, and my father says to me, "Your mother said you'd found someone. Don't tell me you're here because you're getting married." We've been together for a decade already. We don't feel the need to do that. He is essentially the same, but smaller than I remember him, diminished, and I do not know if this is because of his age or is due to the position of maturity from which I now perceive him. It is not the thinned grey hair or the fine spidery threads of red in his cheeks. Perhaps his eyes are not so fierce, but he is no longer the immovable physical presence he once was. "When did you two last see each other?" asks Lana. "Nearly 20 years, says my father. 18, I say. "And you don't want to hug?" she asks. "I don't hold with that," says my father. "Men never used to. It's a modern thing." And I detect a slight smile, which permits me to offer a ghost of something similar in recognition. "Still got the shop?" I say. "Yes. These days it's all I have." There is no obvious trace of rancour. "And God?" "That goes without saying. Would you both like a cup of tea?" "That was the weirdest reunion I've ever witnessed," says Lana as she drives off. "You shook his hand as we left." "Yes,
But that was all. You didn't apologise for running away from home. No, and he didn't say sorry for being an old bastard. And yet you drank his tea and ate his custard creams and talked about nothing of any significance at all. That's right. I thought it went rather well. I wish he hadn't insisted on me taking these boxes of books home, though. I never expected him to have stored them at the back of the shop. It is a bit odd. No, you don't understand. That's the touching part. The emotional element in this drama you've missed. He kept them for me. Suddenly, tears flood my eyes, and I can't say anything without betraying myself. I hope that because Lana is driving, she will not notice. It is strange to be reunited with my old books. None have any resale value, I am sure. Most of them are library discards with stamps and labels, the dust jackets pasted to the boards. Lana and I sit in the middle of the living room going through the boxes, deciding which need to meet their long-deferred fate by being sent for recycling. These make up the majority. Others can be donated to the charity shops in town, including my Saint books. Flicking through a few of them, they have dated badly. My James Bond paperbacks are to be kept by Lana because she decides she wants to read them. But there are also a dozen James Herriot books. I think they were my mother's, I tell Lana. I suppose she might want them. While I am talking, she pulls out the Secret Agent's Handbook. It's tempting to keep it, I say, but I associate it with Vince. There are books by Charles Berlitz and Lyle Watson, and other pseudo-scientists and crackpot commentators on the weird. These are put on their own pile. There has always been a taste for half-baked theories, Lana says. It didn't start with the internet. Listen to this. She has looked up Velikovsky in Huffington's A Directory of Common Sense and quotes, "That people should take seriously the ideas of Velikovsky when they are so obviously wrong is a fascinating reflection of the modern world. Has his pseudoscience become a new religion? Or do the ignorant like the idea that maybe the scientists do not know what they're talking about?" I have to admit that I am interested in keeping some of the books, especially Cooper's Old, New and Alternative Religions. At the last moment, though, before we reseal the boxes for disposal, I decide I want none of them. Chapter 21 2011 5 years pass. Looking back, it is as though somebody snapped their fingers and a half-decade has gone by without us noticing. Not that a great deal doesn't happen. It does. But I am certain we are so busy living life we hardly perceive time slipping away. After Uncle Kenneth's death, I kept his allotment at Zetland Terrace by continuing to pay his rent and not telling the council he had died. When I lost it, another gardener informed on me vegetable cultivation is a cutthroat world. It was 2 years until I could rent a new one on the larger site past the caravan park. It was further to walk, and when we first met, Lana took little interest in it. But after the problems with Vince, Lana started to come along and help me, and now we work on it together. We are there on a sunny Sunday morning in July when I express my admiration for our courgettes, and Lana agrees they are wonderful. Then she gets the giggles and can't stop. After a minute of me poking her and repeatedly asking, "What?" making her laugh all the more, she says, "I'm 37 and you're 39, and we're happy in our vegetable patch. We must be middle-aged." She throws her arms wide and turns round and around. She shouts gleefully, "We're fucking middle-aged!" Lana had thought we were alone, but at least a dozen other gardeners stand up from where they have been working on their own vegetables and look in our direction. "The good life?" asks a woman whose approach I had not noticed. "Yarrow," says Lana.
What brings you to our humble allotment?" Yarrow had always worn tie-dyed skirts and Indian print blouses, but is now dressed smartly and expensively. "I knocked at your door," she says. "Your neighbours said you'd be here. It's been a while." "You moved down to London," says Lana. "A few years ago, where I met Milos, my fiancé." "Congratulations! Is he handsome and rich?" "Yes," she says. "And guess what?" She smooths her tailored jacket down over her barely perceptible bulge. "A baby?" asks Lana, and when she receives a broad smile, the two women embrace. "I'll soon be Mrs. Yarrow Steak," says our visitor. "We're getting married in Prague, and we'd like you to take the wedding photographs." The friends catch up with their news as I weed between the leaks. "I keep in touch with our old boss," says Yarrow, "and when I told her I was engaged, she said I should contact you. But how did you get into wedding photography?" Lana explains. "I took photos informally at the wedding of our friends, Rosie and Tom. It was only a register office do, but the pictures came out well. Then Tom's brother asked me to be the photographer at his rather more upmarket ceremony at Yorkminster." "Wow!" I was petrified. "She needed a lot of persuading," I say. "She nearly pulled out several times, but the results were stunning." "They were better than I expected," said Lana. "She's being too modest," I tell Yarrow, and the photos brought in more commissions. Through word of mouth, she started to be in demand, and now makes good money at it. "Even though it tends to ruin our weekends," admits Lana. "I have a proper little business, and it's going okay." "Lana," I complain, turning away from my weeding again. "It's going brilliantly." I say to Yarrow, "She hasn't just got a good eye for formal group photos. She's great at the unconventional shots." "I sometimes surprise myself," Lana confesses. "I can be quite authoritative with large numbers of wedding guests." "While being able to put everybody at their ease," I point out. "Then you're exactly the photographer we need," says Yarrow. Later, she asks me, "Are you still working for the Persimmon Press?" "He runs it," says Lana proudly. "The other members of staff resigned," I tell her. "That effectively left me in charge." "His horrible old boss sold the company to DKN," Lana says. "The publishers on Northumberland Street in Newcastle. They're well thought of, aren't they?" "Yes, the only downside is I have to commute every day." "Elliot's referred to as the editor," says Lana, "but he handles everything. He's now earning serious money, and he's been offered a chair on the board of DKN." "Congratulations! Then life is working out for both of you." "It is," Lana says with a smile, but then she puts her hand on Yarrow's stomach. "The only thing missing is one of these." "You're trying?" 5 years ago, all kinds of weird stuff went on in our lives," says Lana. I'm concerned she will talk about what happened, but she dismisses it. "I'm sure the crisis brought us together, and now we both want kids as much as each other." She is right. Neither of us have secrets after the incident with Vincent Reynolds, and we both appreciate the other all the more because our comfortable life had been threatened. We have heard nothing from the police, and I was able to move on quicker than Lana. My bad dreams stopped almost immediately, and so did my fear of the doorbell and the telephone. But even now, Lana remains worried, and I know she is occasionally troubled by nightmares. She will never discuss them, but when she wakes me up in the middle of the night, I understand why. I only wish I could make them stop. After some discussion of the forthcoming wedding, Yarrow says to Lana, "When our former boss was recommending you, he mentioned you recently inherited an archive of outsider art." Lana laughs. "About 3 or 4 years ago, Elliot's old religious knowledge teacher, who I met once, left me something like 100,000 items of his work." "Wow! No, not wow. Shit," says Lana. "It was all rubbish, but his family contested the will. I'll let them have it. They thought they were heirs to a treasure trove, but that would never be the case. Elliot and I joke how we lost our chance to be living in clover. Perhaps ye did? No, this is the good life. The commission to take wedding photographs in Prague is discussed for over a year before it finally comes off in August 2011. Yarrow and Milos are to be married at the impressive church of St. Ludmilla in Prague city centre. Yarrow had said her fiancé was rich, but it was a ridiculously expensive event. Half of the guests are flown in from the UK and are put up at the Palace Hotel. Lana arranges for a ticket for me as her assistant, and she is upgraded to a double room. I look forward to the trip as I haven't been to Prague for years and remember it fondly from when Margaret once sent me. The wedding party require Lana's services for several days, taking photographs of the happy couple, their baby, and their family and friends. This is not only on the big day, but at a wedding breakfast at the castle on the day before. There are formal portraits to be taken in the hotel, as well as informal photos at various sites in the city, including the preposterously busy Charles Bridge and the blessedly quiet Stromówka Park. There are also 2 evening parties, one before and one after the wedding, and Lana and I are both exhausted by the end of her commitments. She doesn't even have the energy on the last day to copy the photographs from her camera's memory card onto her laptop. We collapse into bed. We have arranged to stay for 2 further days, and we spend the first asleep until the afternoon. It is not until the early evening that we venture out of the hotel again, and we find ourselves at the bottom of Wenceslas Square debating whether to go to the Hotel Europa for dinner. We have eaten there already and loved it, but we are tempted to look for somewhere different. I get out the Persimmon Guide to the Czech Republic, and Lana takes a step backwards and composes a photo of me. "The tourist," she says, captioning her picture. "I need a photo of you in return," I say, taking the camera, just as 2 young men walk up to us and one asks a question in Czech. When I say I don't understand, he asks, in broken English, if we can tell him the way to the train station. "No," says Lana, stepping back. "Elliot!" And as I look at her, confused, pointing to the top of the square, the other man snatches the camera out of my hand and violently shoves me to one side. They are running off before I even hit the ground. "The wedding pictures!" exclaims Lana, and I am up on my feet and after them. "No, Elliot, it's not important," she screams after me, but it is. I don't care about her camera. Another can be bought with the insurance money, but the photos, her work, cannot be replaced. The 2 thieves are already 100 meters ahead. They have crossed over one road and are heading towards the old town. Without stopping, I dart through a gap in the traffic, and at the next road they turn and look behind to check if anyone is following. They've missed their opportunity to cross quickly, and they have to dance around a bus, but they are off again. I've reduced the distance, and once more the traffic is kind to me. There is now, perhaps, only 50 meters between us, and though I am not particularly fit, and I am older than both men, the adrenaline is coursing through me. I see them turn left into an alley, and when I reach it, they are only a few meters ahead, going right into another. Together, the 2 men crash into tourists in the narrow thoroughfare, and their progress is slowed. But as I shout after them, I find the pedestrians stand aside to let me pass. I wish someone would stop the thieves, but I am gaining on them. Around a further corner, I glimpse them disappearing under an archway, and, when I enter it, I hear hurried steps on a stone stair. It is dark, but I run up after them, and suddenly they are cornered, trying to open a door that is locked. They turn on me, and it is then that I notice the knife, and realize how unwise I have been. I am not a hero. I will run away if I need to, and I am convinced I can. I am shattered. My lungs are working overtime, but there is a clear escape route if they try to attack. But I have the advantage. They are surprised and scared, and all I want is the memory card. And so I start talking to them in that stupid pidgin English I adopt when attempting to make myself understood by foreigners. And because they are staring at me blankly, I press on with my attempt, augmenting my carefully chosen phrases with a charade of hand signs to emphasize the difference between the camera and the memory card. But then I appreciate that something very odd has taken place. They are unmoving, not even blinking. I have heard no footsteps, but standing next to me is a small woman, and I jump in fright, despite the fact she is no threat. When she looks up at me, I recognize her moon face. She shakes her head wearily, walks over to the man with the camera, and takes it from him. "Just go," she says, handing it to me. "Forget about this." "What's happening? Who are you?" "Do I have to explain?" "Yes." "Then consider me your fairy godmother," she says with a Teesside accent. "How—" I'm about to add what and why, but she preempts me by saying, "You wouldn't believe me, pet. Try me." She sighs and says, "What if I tell you I'm an angel?" "You can't be." "There, you see. Don't they usually have wings sprouting from their shoulder blades? Halos? And if I look like that, then you'd believe me?" "Possibly, but not necessarily. The trouble with appearing that way is I'd cause too much comment. I try not to be noticed." "But I've seen you before." "You have, which is my failing. I'm merely meant to be observing, making sure things work out for the best amidst all the chaos. Don't ask me to explain. Take the camera to Lana and forget all about this." I realise there is absolutely no sound. Surely there are crowds of tourists in the alley outside. "You've stopped time," I say. "Not for the whole world, no. That would be quite a challenge. But time is relative, and here it is passing infinitely slowly so we can have this conversation. Now please, leave without thanking me. Say nothing to anyone. Nobody will believe you anyway." "Can I ask you a question?" "If you have to." It is a story I have not thought of for years. "Have you ever come to the aid of a man called McCann?" I ask her. "Yes. Not that he thanked me, but you must return to Lana. She'll be worried about you." I don't know how to account for what I have just experienced. Lana is, rightly, upset with me when I find her standing at the bottom of Wenceslas Square, remonstrating with two policemen. When she sees me, she runs over and hugs me while telling me off. Then she realises, with surprise, I am holding the camera, and I tell her and the policeman that the thieves threw it down as they ran away. Of course, I do not mention the angel. The police are happy to tell me off as well. I should not have taken such a risk, they say, and I agree. I don't say anything about their lack of interest in trying to apprehend those who stole the camera. "I slapped you once, years ago," Lana says when the policemen have shambled off. "I was angry with you then, and I'm tempted to do the same again." I apologise once more, agreeing I hadn't thought it through. "I saw their knife," she says. I tell her I didn't, and I ask if we can get on with what time remains for us in Prague. Through Lana's commission, we have already been to the obvious sights, and although we had considered spending our second free day visiting the Old Town, we decide instead to walk out to the National Gallery's collection of modern art at the Wieleczki Palak. The idea is that we will keep away from the incessant press of other tourists. Prague city centre at the height of summer is almost unbearable. We also hope to avoid camera thieves. I have kept my thoughts to myself overnight, not believing what I remember having taken place. With the guide in Lana's bag, we cross the river and walk up through a park where the trees offer some shade. I appreciate the rest for my eyes. I have been squinting in the bright sunshine for too many days. We are following the paths of granite setts with a vague sense of bearing in the right direction. I know if we head north, crossing 2 or 3 streets before going east, we will be fine. We are walking arm in arm up a road I later note is signed Kamieniczka, when we pass an ugly, grey, concrete-rendered building that looks like an apartment block. In the corner, though, is a recess allowing for a few steps down to a low doorway. There is a shiny metal sign above it that takes my eye. It states, in English, Children of the Cross. That's a name I didn't think I'd see again. Or particularly want to, says Lana. She disengages her arm from mine, and we both look at the door, where there is a handwritten sign behind the glass stating Otrevenik, which we have learnt means open. It can't be the same church, she says. Weren't they wound up in 2002? There's only one way to find out. I follow her down the steps, and she opens the door into a small room with white walls. There is a desk facing us with a computer on it, and above it is a portrait of Philip Odiwiki. Through another door, which is half open, we can hear voices. Neither Lana or I speak. We want to assess the place before we have to talk to anyone. Around the room are shelves containing religious literature, and we both read the titles of the large, photocopied and stapled booklets. Most are in Czech, but the others bear titles such as The Everlasting Gospel and New Songs for New Times. There are also a series of testimonies written by a dozen different authors who all have names implying as many nationalities. Mohuva Mumutsi? Asks a voice behind us. A short woman has appeared from the inner room. She has her hair tied back severely, and she is wearing what looks like a homemade white smock. Ahoy, I say, and then ask, do you speak English? English, she asks. She shakes her head and disappears back through the door, and a moment later it might be her twin sister who appears. She wears an identical smock, but her hair is darker and cropped short. How can I help? We are interested in the Children of the Cross, says Lana. We have a friend who was a member. Here, in Praha? No, in the United Kingdom. We have churches all over the globe. Soon everybody in the whole world will hear the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, our Saviour, and accept him into their hearts. Lana looks to me for assistance. I'm not sure what to say, so I tell the woman, we haven't seen this friend for some years. We wondered what had happened to him. She smiles and says, we are blessed with millions of members worldwide. I resist saying, really? I'm wondering if I do want to contact Vince. I feel like taking Lana's arm and leaving. Let me help you, the woman says, and sits at her desk. Tell me his name and where does he live? Vincent Reynolds, says Lana, who takes a chair opposite the woman. We don't know where he is now, but he comes originally from Thirsk in North Yorkshire. The woman types on her keyboard with a deliberate finger, and then frowns. She then uses the backspace and asks how to spell Reynolds, before making another attempt. After several minutes of concentrated searching, she turns the monitor around to face us. There is a Reynolds on our database of brothers and sisters. He is a V. Reynolds, and he is at Bethel in Faring. Where's Faring? I ask. I'm not wearing my reading glasses, and all I see is a blurred table of data. Sweden, apparently, says Lana. Can I make a note of the address? As Lana is writing it down, I ask the woman if she has met Philip Odiwiki, and her face breaks into the widest smile I have come across since being in Prague, and I have seen many among the wedding party, both sincere and false. Oh yes, and he was wonderful. He is our leader, our inspiration, our reason to live." "And do you still believe he is the Son of God?" "Yes, he is here to shepherd us into heaven." "For the apocalypse, Armageddon?" "For those who have accepted Philip, it will be beautiful." "But wasn't that meant to have happened in the year 2000? "Oh," she says, looking coy, "it might take place at any time. After 2,000 years, the calculations will not be accurate to the day, month, or even year. Be prepared at all times." "For the end of the world is nigh," I say, and thank her. What do we do with this information? I ask Lana once we are out on Kamenichka Street. "Go and visit," she says, folding up the piece of paper upon which she has written the address. As we later walk around the National Gallery, neither of us appreciate what we are looking at. "I suppose we could call first," says Lana. "But what do we want to achieve?" "Understanding." Why has the church sprung up again? I don't know. Millions of members? It sounds very unlikely. We locate a bench and both take out our phones and search online for the Children of the Cross. There is, once again, a website, but now it is modern and easy to use. It includes a list of addresses and we follow a link to the Bethel in Faring, leading us to a page headed with a photograph of a long red building with many windows. There is a large black cross leaning against the front wall. "They're back with a vengeance," says Lana. "Try the link to the Everlasting Gospels, and there are hundreds, and thousands of testimonies, all creepy stuff, the same as before, claiming Philip interceded in apparently fatal illnesses. And here's one who writes, 'How our blessed leader raised me from the dead.' Laughable, rather than creepy, I'd say. There's a woman who claims she won the lottery thanks to Philip. He did that in the past. A stern attendant comes over and asks us to leave if we need to talk and use our phones, and so we apologise and put them away. We are told off by another attendant 10 minutes afterwards for making too much noise when we discuss whether we are really going to Sweden, when the alternative is to forget all about Vince and the Children of the Cross. Having debated the subject for an hour, our positions have changed, and Lana is more inclined to drop the matter than I am. I have come around to the idea that we should investigate them. I'm convinced the angel was facilitating our discovery of the offices of the Children of the Cross. She was ensuring we found out about Faring, and that we visit. But I can't tell Lana this, and I am hoping the angel has our best interests at heart. "Let's find a way to Faring," I say as we walk outside. "Then hopefully we can draw a line under everything." "Okay," says Lana. "You work out how we travel there, and we'll get it over and done with." Chapter 22. October 2011. We discover that Faring is a small hamlet 50 miles north of Stockholm. I phone Eva and Dave to make sure they are happy to continue to feed our cat for another couple of days, and I book tickets for me and Lana to go to Sweden while we are still in the Czech Republic. We have only 1 day in Saltburn, and then we fly from Newcastle, but Lana has so much to do after the wedding she almost does not come with me. I am busy catching up with my own work, booking extra time off and trying to find Murakami, who has absconded. Just before we leave, I locate him over the road with the Crowthers. We are not jet-lagged, but we are dog-tired. This means I sleep well, but Lana does not. On our final night in Prague, she wakes up thrashing about with the bedsheets wrapped about her legs. She says she was dreaming. "I was in a big derelict building, and I was frightened by the shadows high up in the rafters. To escape them, I went through a door, even though I was scared to do so. You and Harrison were on the other side, with guns, laughing and joking about someone, saying how worthless they were. Then I realised you were talking about me." On our night at home in Saltburn, she has another bad dream. "I was living on Opal Street with my mum and dad. Everything was fine, but then there was a knock at the door and I was afraid. I looked down from my bedroom window, sure it would be Harrison, but you and the police were coming for me. Standing out in the street, watching, putting them up to it, was Vincent Reynolds." On both occasions I tried to comfort Lana, telling her they were only dreams, but we both realised that dreams have meaning. At the last minute, Lana relents and throws a few items into a bag, and we leave our house on Sapphire Street in a hailstorm of biblical proportions. We have packed our winter clothes, but by mid-afternoon we are in the centre of Stockholm in a heat wave. It is stifling. We are booked into a cheap hotel for 2 nights, intending to drive to Föring the following day, and Lana and I are both tired. I attempt to hire a car through the hotel receptionist, but when I tell her where we are heading, she recommends we take the train to Uppsala and then a heritage line to Föring. "It is run by enthusiasts and is very beautiful," she explains. "It will be quicker, easier, and cooler." I assume she knows what she is saying, so thank her for the advice. Up in our room, the light is on in the bathroom, so I call through the door. "I've worked out how we get there. It's not exactly as we planned." And then I hear a sob. Gently opening the bathroom door, I find Lana sitting on the edge of the bath, violently wiping away tears, making a mess of her mascara. "Hey," I say, kneeling down in front of her. "What's up?" "Nothing. I've just got the heebie-jeebies." "About visiting Föring?" She nods, and I ask why. "You don't believe me when I say I'm psychic?" "I knew you were going to say that." "Stop it, Elliot. I'm serious. Either it'll all go horribly wrong, or I'm losing my mind, and you need to take me home, now." "And what's brought this on?" "I had I'm not sure. I saw something. A premonition." "Of what?" "Us in Föring, and it'll end badly." "We shouldn't have come here so soon after Prague. We should have given it a few weeks. You're exhausted." "Perhaps. Would it help to tell me what you saw?" "I'd been lying on the bed checking text and emails, and I came in here for a pee. I wasn't thinking. I switched on the light, and in the mirrors I glimpsed a reflection of myself. But I wasn't here in this hotel. I was in a huge echoing barn of a building. I don't want to say any more. Look, let's forget Föring. We'll go out for dinner tonight, and tomorrow we can spend the day at Skansen." "I promised you watermelon ice cream." "You did. And the day after that we'll be flying home." And we do have a splendid meal that night. We sit in a roped-off area on the pavement in front of the restaurant, and we drink expensive cocktails slowly to make them last. Local men delight in driving past in ludicrously high-performance cars with faulty exhausts, making us laugh. "It is not usually this warm in Stockholm," says the waiter apologetically, and for once it feels as if we are on a proper holiday. We don't talk about Föring at all that evening, and the next morning at breakfast I say we should leave early to give ourselves plenty of time to see Skansen. I've been there before, taking photos for the Guide to Sweden, back when Margaret owned Persimmon and James McCann had edited the book. I sing the praises of the Matchstick Museum. "No," Lana says, eating grapefruit. "I've changed my mind. We have to travel to Föring after all." "We don't have to." "But we do. Call it intuition. But I think it's our one chance to work out what's been happening. 5 years ago, we were content to forget about it, to get on with our lives. But the children of the cross have returned, haven't they? They've always been there, gnawing away at the back of our minds. I can't say it has affected me like that. And it might stop my nightmares," she says. "Did you dream again last night?" Oh yes, I dreamed. I consent to go if Lana is sure. There is every likelihood, I tell myself, there will be nothing in Faring, just another religious retreat that was apparently vacated years ago. Having left the first train at Uppsala station, the next is not so easy to locate. We miss the sign and needlessly walk a half-mile around a large housing development until we find our platform. It is only obvious where to catch the train because we witness the strange sight of a steam engine crossing modern roads and stopping outside the main station. We pay when we get on board to return tickets to Faring, and we wait for the departure. The carriage is old but comfortable, with varnished wooden surfaces reflecting the calm sunlight of an earlier century. We sink into overstuffed, mulberry-upholstered seats as several dozen tourists join us, and a man in a suit sits opposite. He looks to be a conventional businessman, but he is wearing a cowboy hat. "Dia fovami," he says. When we look puzzled, he translates. "It is too warm." The air-conditioned train between Stockholm and Uppsala hasn't prepared us for the fact it is even hotter than the previous day. "I'm going home because my office is a furnace," he says with good English. He takes off his hat and fans himself with it. "This train is how I commute. It is wonderful, isn't it?" The whistle blows, and a second later we hear a whoosh of steam, and the carriage jolts. "You are holidaymakers?" he asks. "Not really," says Lana. "We are looking for a friend," I say, wondering if I ought to be telling anyone. "In Liana? That is where I come from. I know everybody in Liana." "No, Faring. Not many live in Faring. But ignore me. I rarely go there. It has only a few houses and a supermarket." "Our friend is part of a church there," says Lana, but the man shakes his head. "There is a graveyard, but there's no church at Faring." I say, "It's not the end of the world if we don't find him." "The end of the world?" asks the man, confused by the expression. "It's not important," I explain, and at that moment I believe it. Since boarding the train I have relaxed, even if Lana hasn't, and the slow rattling of the carriages is reassuring as the engine eases us out through the suburbs of Uppsala. Once in the countryside, we see woods and fields, people sunbathing on rocks and swimming in lakes. Houses, barns, and summer cottages slide by. Most of the buildings appear to be made of metal and timber, and most are a dark red with a white trim around the windows, doors, verges, and eaves. Our fellow passenger, Frederick, tells us about the area before he gets out in Liana, explaining it is now Lena. The archaic spelling is used for the railway because it is more appropriate. We agree that it is. Frederick has been a little too talkative. It is good to hold hands afterwards and look out at the passing scenery as the train continues on to Almunia through Muga without stopping. And finally we stop at Faring, where everybody gets off. It has taken an hour and a half, and though I am hot, I'm feeling composed. Until we climb down from the carriage. As we walk away from the train, guided by my memory of the route planned online, my heart rate slowly increases. We buy drinks in the supermarket and, because the old woman at the checkout is friendly, I ask her if she has heard of the Children of the Cross. When she says she hasn't, I ask about a church that will have been recently established, and she claims she knows where I mean. She confirms we take the road out of Faring and then follow a lane to the right. I notice her name, printed on a badge, is Camilla. She says there will be a sign. "A sign?" asks Lana as we leave. "Like an eclipse, or beasts talking in human tongues?" We stride off, despite the heat and lack of shade. After a mile, we have left Faring behind, and we find the narrow lane. There are two signs, the first of which austerely states, Kurgokart. The second is a small, neatly hand-painted wooden sign, Children of the Cross. Following it takes us through a plantation of pines and past a rickety fenced graveyard. There are, at most, a dozen low headstones, and one attracts my eye because there is a woman tending the grave, cutting the grass with a pair of shears. It is the only stone with flowers, a large bunch of vermilion roses. "Let's press on," says Lana, but I recognize the woman, who appears even more diminutive than usual as she crouches down by the grave. "Hello," I say, and she looks up. "Keep on along the track," she orders, "otherwise you'll have too much to explain to Lana." "You're here to make sure everything goes all right?" "Exactly." "And will it?" "I can't tell. I can do many things, but I can't see the future." I look at the headstone, and there are two names upon it. Central and original to the placing of the stone is R. McCann, 1944. Below it, freshly incised, is J. McCann, 1934 to 2006. "He found his father's grave then?" "I must be soft in the head," says the angel. "I arranged this, but I shouldn't be expected to organise everything myself. Don't ask me to explain. Carry on to Lana." "I'd like you to meet her." "I'm certain she's very nice, but no thank you." "You've slowed down time again," I say, sitting on the grass. "Tell me about yourself. Tell me about Philip." "You don't want to know about me or Philip. You want to understand the nature of God." "Okay, let's start at the top." She smiles and asks, "Have you heard the story of the blind man and the elephant?" "No." "It's a tale from India. A group of blind men come across an elephant. The first man pats the flank of the elephant and describes it as a wall. The second feels a tusk and says, 'No, the elephant is like a spear.' The third touches the trunk and declares that it's a wriggling serpent. You understand the meaning of the story? It illustrates how the truth can be seen and described in different ways, and yet still be the truth. God is an elephant. You've missed the point. What you think of as God is the manifestation of something which you cannot perceive properly." "But I don't believe in God." "You don't imagine him as a venerable old gentleman in flowing robes with a beard, as many Christians do," she says patiently. "Of course, some think of him as cruel or angry. Others recognize Mother Earth instead, while for many it may be a whole pantheon of different deities, depending on your background." I am reminded of Cooper's book. "You're saying all religions have glimpsed the truth, but none have fully understood it." "Perhaps the reason some identify God as a wall, like the first blind man, is because they're examining the elephant's enclosure." "Me?" "Possibly. Or maybe you came up against the hippopotamus." "Are angels allowed to make fun of people?" "We can do almost anything." "But what have you seen from your rather more elevated position as an angel?" "It won't be helpful to you if I describe my God." "How does it look from Philip's perspective?" "Perhaps he's on the elephant's back, but why would he necessarily get a better view from up there?" "Or is it just an elephant after all, not a supreme deity?" The moon-faced angel smiles and returns to clipping the grass. I smell the heavy perfume of the roses for the first time. "Coming," I call after Lana, who continues up the road that is becoming more of a dirt track. We pass between several fields, and my legs are starting to ache. When I mention that no vehicles have passed us and wonder how much further it is, a large red building appears from around a small wood of birch trees. The building assumes the proportions we had seen in the photo on the website, and there is the cross, 12 feet high, leaning against the wall. Parked in the yard, there are a dozen cars, all of them new and expensive looking. It is quiet and oppressive, and we are already out of water, so it is a relief to walk up to the door in the middle of the long facade and to find ourselves in the shade. "Somebody has to be in," says Lana, and she pulls the rope of a rusty bell. The sound breaks the somnolence of midday. "That was in Sandwich," I tell her, pointing to the cross, which is presumably too big to fit inside. I recognise the scorch marks. When the door opens, Vincent Reynolds is standing there, smiling. "Hello, we've been expecting you," he says. The interior of the building is very different from the St. Michael retreat on the banks of Ullswater. It is far more institutional, reminding me of a school or an old people's home that has been run by a local authority since it was built in the 1970s. Instead of cool ivory-painted walls, soft carpets, stone and oak, everything is gloss-white panelling and curling linoleum. It is as though the place has been regularly redecorated without the previous paint being removed, so the details have lost their definition. It is clean, but in the sense that the minimum effort has always been maintained. In the hall, rather than an inglenook, there is a strange, tall Swedish stove, with a crucifix to one side. "I'll show you to your rooms," says Vince. "We only have singles, but they will be adjoining." "We're not staying," I tell him. "We've a few hours before the last train to Uppsala. That's plenty of time." "It depends on what you're here for." "Answers," says Lana, "for you to explain what the children of the cross have been up to, disappearing and reappearing." He is obviously put out. "Philip said you would be with us for a few days, at least." "Philip had no idea we were coming." "Oh, but he's known for a while." I suggest to Lana. Their office in Prague told them we were interested. "In Prague?" says Vince. "I didn't know we had an office in the Czech Republic." "But they couldn't have been certain we would come, or when." "I don't understand how Philip knew," says Vince with a smile, "but he did. And here you are. I realise you'll want to talk with him, but he's busy right now. This evening he will give you as much time as you need." "We don't even have to speak to Philip," I say. "I'm sure you can explain things quite as well. After all, Vince, it was you who said you were going to the police 5 years ago, but then you vanished off the face of the earth." "Yes," he agrees with a grin. "I did, didn't I?" "Why? How?" "Philip really is the best person to talk to." "We're wasting our time here, Elliot," says Lana. "They're all just as nutty as when you saw them last. Let's go." "But you've travelled all this way," says Vince. "A little patience is all I ask. Let me see what I can do." Chapter 23. October 2011. Vince takes us into a huge room with lofty ceilings. It should be too spacious to be stuffy, but the atmosphere is uncomfortable, and he opens glazed doors, hoping to circulate the heavy air. In one corner there is an odd assortment of furniture facing another traditional Swedish stove that is, mercifully, unlit. While we wait, I walk up to a bookcase, but I cannot read the titles. On the top is a large Bible bound in vibrant tangerine cloth, and I pick it up. "I recognise this room," says Lana. "Where from?" I ask, but she does not answer. The Bible falls open where there is a makeshift bookmark sticking out from the pages. I can't see the design, but different tinted inks have bled through the paper, and I guess what it is before I unfold it. Drawn for children in an uninspired black outline is a stereotyped representation of Christ on a cloud, surrounded by angels. It has been coloured in with garish felt-tip pen. "Come on, enlighten us," says Lana. She's looking out of the window to the rear of the building at a field of scrubby grass bordered by indifferent trees. The Bible is printed in Swedish, but on the piece of paper the text underneath the drawing is in English. I read, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who remain will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we be ever with the Lord." "Amen," comes a quiet voice from the doorway. It is Philip Oduwiki. Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16. "Did you descend from heaven with a shout?" I ask him. "No," he says, shaking his head, "nor with the voice of the archangel." "The archangel might be very softly spoken." "Perhaps." "Lana, this is Philip, otherwise known to Vincent as Jesus Christ version 2. Philip, this is Lana, my partner." "Welcome to you both," he says. "Welcome to Faring." "The new headquarters of the Children of the Cross?" "For the moment," he concedes. "You have come here seeking answers." "We have," says Lana. "I would like to quote Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and learn not on your own understanding." He stalls me when I start to protest. "I realize you would not consider it an adequate answer, would you, Eliot?" "No, but even if we shared your faith, what's wrong with wanting you to explain?" "Nothing at all," he says, and asks us to be seated. I take Lana's hand, or she takes mine, I'm not sure which, and we sit together on a worn leather sofa. Philip perches on the edge of an uncomfortable-looking high-backed chair opposite us. I show Lana the drawing of Christ descending from heaven, and she says, "That looks like Mr. Overden's work." "Chris Overden?" says Philip. "Yes." "Okay," says Lana, slowly. "He was Eliot and Vincent's teacher," Philip tells her. "You know him?" "It seems I'm destined to know everyone." "I've heard a lot about you," says Lana. "Good things, I hope?" "It's hard to say." "Where's Vince?" I ask. "Oh, he's on his way," says Philip, who continues to smile. "But first I want to introduce you to Gilbert and Gabriel." The two men enter the room as if they have heard their cue, their soft shoes making no sound on the linoleum as they reverentially approach. Lana and I stand up again. The men bow slightly towards Philip, and then both shake our hands. There are introductions, and we all sit down. "We met before," says Gabriel, "in Sandvik." "You must forgive me for not remembering," I say. "It was a few years ago." "Not so many, and not so long." They nod to each other, smiling, pleased. And then Vince comes in. He too walks over like a vicar in a church, humbly, but with the sense of knowing the place is his, that Lana and I are the impostors. "We are all met," Philip says. "Good." He turns to me and Lana. "You want me to tell you where the Children of the Cross disappeared to 5 years ago. But I would prefer to go back further than that, if I may. When we first met, Eliot, I told you I had been a hospital porter in Nigeria. I had experiences that were, well, miraculous. It was as though I was responsible for marvelous occurrences that could not be rationally explained, and I was called Messiah. When I denied the claim, I was praised for my humility. I decided the only thing to do was form the Children of the Cross, to do good work on an organized basis. "And you declared the world would end in the year 2000. "Yes, I did. And I believed it. You have asked the question several times, Eliot. If I am the Messiah, how could I make such a mistake? This is what I, too, have been asking. Gilbert and Gabriel know about this, but some of it will be new to Vincent. I had heard voices. Elliot, you said lack of food might have caused an hallucination. Gilbert and Gabriel are convinced I truly experienced the voice of God. But what do you think? Lana asks. I still don't know. But the world didn't end, didn't it? Asks Gilbert. It did for those with the eyes to see. I look at Lana and say, Houston. Gilbert continues. On a spiritual level, the change was apocalyptic. Lana says patiently, but surely the apocalypse ought to be noticeable by even the most insensitive of us. You would have thought so, wouldn't you? Philip agrees. Gabriel adds, Behold, God is great, and yet we know him not. Something has gone wrong, says Philip. Something has gone badly wrong, and I believe I am being tested. It was a simple test, I say. I understand, says Philip, and I failed. Large tears roll down his cheeks, but he continues to smile hopelessly. The sight is strangely moving. Gilbert leans over and pats his arm. I do not know if I am blessed or cursed, says Philip. The new millennium began. The children of the cross lifted their eyes to the heavens, but nothing happened. It was not your mistake, says Gabriel determinedly. Philip was not in error. If he is not Christ, our Saviour, says Gilbert, why does he continue to perform miracles? Why does he possess limitless powers? If he is the second Christ, I ask, why did he get the date for the apocalypse wrong? He didn't, but we're still here. I'm losing my patience with these two acolytes. Where is the proper scientific proof for one single miracle? I ask. We read a few of the testimonials online and, at best, believers give Philip credit, retrospectively, for things that would have occurred anyway. But you cannot doubt their faith, says Gilbert. No, but none of it is proof. Faith doesn't require proof. It is delusional. It might appear that way to an unbeliever. Philip tells me, I can understand your point of view. I say, I remember you claiming you transported the children of the cross from Calabar to Sandwich with the snap of your fingers. He did, says Gilbert. Or did he click his heels together 3 times? Asks Lana. Now you are being rude. What do you expect? Arguing that the world ended spiritually is the most pathetic attempt to excuse yourselves. The confidence trick has been exposed. Or perhaps it really took place, says Gilbert. And it has happened again, says Gabriel, excited. What? Lana asks. The world ended twice, and nobody noticed on either occasion. Vince finally ventures to join the discussion. For us, Lana, Elliot, for believers, the world ended. We witnessed a miracle. We were wiped off the face of the earth in Calabar to be reborn in Sandwich. No matter what you did or didn't experience, for us it was an extremely shocking event, and one that quelled any uncertainty as to Philip's powers. We felt it ought to have dismissed Philip's doubts, but he is so profoundly meek and self-effacing and constantly questioning that it didn't put his mind at rest. And then you came to visit us, Elliot, and you, personally, played a big part in the story of the children of the cross. You had an effect on Philip, and an intensely upsetting one for us. He believed you were the reason we were there on the banks of Lake Ullswater, but after you came and walked away unmoved, Philip said being there served no purpose after all. I became angry, said Philip. I was frustrated. I said that anywhere else, at any other time, I could do more good than I was doing here. And behold, said Gilbert, there was a mighty roaring in the heavens, and the earth shook.
There was lightning and smoke and sulphur, and all the angels and demons cried out together. I missed that as well, I say. And as a consequence, we find ourselves here in Sweden, says Philip. 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye, says Vince. Why Sweden? I ask. I do not know. Do you have to witness a miracle for yourself? Asks Gilbert with anger. Our testimonies are not enough for you. Why should they be? Asks Philip. Because you are above performing magic tricks, says Gabriel. If they do not believe, then that is their problem. I understand why they would want to witness a miracle, says Philip. No, insists Gabriel. You do not cheapen yourself like a stage magician, not as if you are a cut-price Dr. Emmanuel Breeze. You know Dr. Breeze? I ask him. Philip gives me a look as if to say again, I am destined to know everyone. Then he turns to Gabriel. For so long I have listened to you telling me and others of what I am capable. I am tired, so very tired of all this. As you said, you are being tested. Philip shakes his head. But time after time, I failed those examinations. And now Elliot has been sent to me with Lana. Once again, it takes outsiders to reveal to me the error of our ways. I don't dare believe we might be talking Philip around. Was that ever my intention? Of course it was, but suddenly I can't see the point. If they are happy in their strange little world, why should I trouble them? Let me remind you of the wonderful things you have done, says Gabriel, betraying his impatience. The healing, the love. Philip puts up his hand. I believe I am merely a man. I have no more spiritual significance than you, Gabriel, or Vincent, or our visitors here. Perhaps my destiny is to be a leader, perhaps a teacher, a healer even. But I am not Christ. It is wrong to continue this delusion. Gabriel is right, Vincent says hopefully. You are being tested. Philip laughs with exasperation. You are all so predisposed to think of me as your Messiah. Nothing will convince you otherwise. His expression becomes hard to read. Perhaps this is a moment for a miracle. Not to show Elliot the truth, to teach you. Nobody reacts. I will return to my old profession, he announces, standing up. I can do more good going back to being a hospital porter. You are not leaving us, asks Gilbert, incredulous. Indeed, I am. You can achieve so much more as our leader, says Gabriel. It is too late. Gabriel persists in protesting, but Philip looks down at us, and we look up at him. My attention is caught by Vince burying his face in his hands. He is weeping. Philip follows my eyes and sees Vince in despair. He walks over and puts a hand lightly on his head. He quietly asks him not to cry, and I feel uncomfortable that I have caused all this. I don't immediately notice that Gilbert has turned to me, angry. He says something I can't quite catch. I'm sorry, I say, meaning, pardon, I didn't hear you. But Gilbert does not take it this way. No, you are not sorry. This is what you wanted. Gilbert? Philip tries to calm the man. I gather my wits and say, you have all had amazing experiences, witnessed things which appear miraculous, but they cannot be what you think they are. And if Philip wishes to leave you, we've simply been a catalyst. I refuse to believe it. Lana and I should go now. We are all being tested, Gabriel says desperately. Our faith in God, in Philip, in everything. He moves off his chair and onto his knees, his hands together as if in readiness for prayer. We must be strong, says Gabriel.
We must not lose sight of what is good and true. Philip suddenly shouts at him, "Haven't you been listening?" And we are taken aback by the violence and volume of his voice. "Yes, but you do not understand what you are saying. It is your fate to lead us into heaven. Pray, meditate, ask God for guidance." "No." "You must recognize what you have done," Gabriel pleads. "What can you do? What will you do?" "Shut up," shouts Philip, but Gabriel continues to whine. "Lead us, Philip. Show us the way." Philip glances around and walks to the stove, where he picks up a poker. We watch him weigh it in his hand. Then he takes several resolute paces to Gabriel. "If I were Christ," he says with determination, "then I would not do this." In one swift movement, he brings the poker down, catching Gabriel on the ear. Gabriel shrieks as he falls to the floor. A great flap of skin and hair ripped aside to reveal white, bloody bone beneath. Like the others, I instinctively draw back in my chair, horrified. "There," says Philip grimly. "There you have proof of your folly, and of mine. Now will you leave me alone?" Philip strides to the door, flinging the poker away so it clatters over the linoleum. He only turns when Gabriel, on the floor, manages to call out, "Philip! Philip!" begs the wounded man. "Philip, I do not understand, but I am your willing instrument." "What have you done?" asks Vince. He puts one hand over his mouth and slaps his other hand over that. Gilbert says with a firm, awed voice, "We are all of us instruments of the Lord. This is how it is ordained. We are all being tested, and all must be found pure at heart." "Be quiet!" roars Philip, and Gilbert is finally silent. Philip looks at us. His eyes are wide and wild, and he makes a violent gesture with both of his arms. There is an immediate explosion, a flash of lightning, and a simultaneous clap of thunder, and everything is blown apart. I am blinded, my lungs are emptied of air, and my feet are swept out from beneath me. I am flying backwards, flailing around until I hit the ground, landing in a heap. I scrabble about and try, in vain, to stand. I gasp for oxygen, choking, grasping for Lana, but I do not find her. My eyes are streaming, and I am half blind with a flaring light every time I blink. After a few seconds, I make out a vague outline of what is about me through smoke and particles of wheeling dust. I still cannot stand, and so I crouch with one hand on the ground because I feel dizzy and confused, and I am copiously sick. When I control my retching, I continue to blink until my sight clears. When I look up, Philip is standing in front of me. I ask him, "What on earth have you done?" "You won't believe me," he says with a strange glee. I can tell he is taunting me. "You'll say this is an hallucination. Whether real or not, it is wrong. Evil? I don't know what that word means. Perhaps Mr. Ovenden was right about me." The smoke clears, and I perceive we are outside. It is as though we are in a bomb crater, with mud and burning wood and shattered brick all around. "Where is Lana?" I ask. I don't believe Vince, Gilbert, or poor wounded Gabriel are with us either. I have the terrible feeling I am still at the site of the Bethel in Thuringe, but the building has gone. My mind reels with the enormity of what has happened. Then I realize Philip is talking to me. "Gabriel said I should act with my heart, because anything I do is God's will and God's love. There is a plan, apparently, and an awful pattern, and every element is connected, although we might not understand it." "The moon-faced woman," I say. "The angel." But then I don't give a shit about her. "Where is Lana?" I ask again, standing carefully, unsteady on my feet.
With Vincent, Gilbert, and Gabriel, blown into 1,000 million fragments and scattered across this whole accursed planet.
I walk forward and take the man by the open-necked scruff of his shirt.
You're the one who performs miracles, I say, suddenly experiencing such anger that would be possible for me to tear this man's head off. Bring them back!
When he doesn't answer, I lift him off the ground as though he has no more weight than a sack of leaves. I am strangling him, and after a few moments' satisfaction at this, I throw him down so he falls on the charred earth. From there, he laughs hysterically.
Get up,
I command, but he will not. I kick him in the ribs, hard.
Get up,
I shout, and he rises to his knees painfully.
Whatever you're doing, I say, whatever you're capable of, whatever you are, this is wrong. Behold, God is great, he says to himself, and yet we know him not.
I tell him again and again that he knows this is wrong. I am driven to insist on it repeatedly until he finally agrees with me. At that moment, the sun breaks through the smoke, and once again I take Philip by the neck and lift him up. When he can stand, I let him go, and he speaks hoarsely, hesitantly.
Your Mr. Overton said I was either the Messiah or the devil.
Who told you that?
Perhaps I was there.
No, you were not.
Okay, I wasn't.
So how did you know he said that?
In the same way, I know so many things I shouldn't, and with all that knowledge, I ought to understand. As I said, there are patterns.
You mean fate?
No, because we still have free will. But there are designs and meanings we can't always discern. You are an agnostic, Eliot. You say, if there is a God, he is unknowable. I promise, I comprehend as little as you.
But you must be able to explain this.
No.
You can say abracadabra and make it all right.
Can I?
Try it. He nods meekly and smiles like a well-meaning, vague Church of England curate. But then he roars like an Old Testament prophet. There is another explosion, and I am blown off my feet again, thrown around in a maelstrom of smoke and fire in which I cannot breathe without taking in lungfuls of dust and dirt. I must lose consciousness because I am aware that everything has been black and I am waking up, lying on my back on a cold, hard concrete. My sight is flaring again every time I blink, but this fades as my eyes adjust to the lower lighting levels. I do not know where I am, but there is something familiar about my surroundings. My senses are dull and blurred, but they are returning, and I am looking up into the rafters of a long, low, dilapidated building. There is an unmistakable tang of old oil and metal, as well as damp and rotting paper. It appears to be the recycling business at Thirsk Airfield, but I do not understand how I've got here from the ruins of the Bethel in Feringe. For a while, I am sure I am listening to people talking, but then, as my ears stop ringing, all I hear is the sound of the wind outside, the creaking of the roof, and the tapping of branches against the walls. Every detail slowly comes into focus, including a tatty calendar pinned to the wall that claims it is 1988. I stand, carefully, unsteadily. I ache abominably. In front of me is a door, and there are hushed but excited voices coming from the other side of it. I consider leaving. I could walk away, but into what kind of world? I am certain I have no choice but to go into the next room. Why else would I be here? I grasp the door handle before I can change my mind. Within the small office there are 2 young men. Each has a gun pointed at me, and I cannot tell which one fires because the flash is too bright, and a blow to my chest shoves me backwards into devastating darkness. It feels like hours later, maybe even decades. An incredible pain racks my body as I try and fail to breathe. I panic. Everything is dark green and the air is thick as though I am at the bottom of a dead sea. I gasp involuntarily, but at each attempted breath, each half-breath, there is a burning agony I would give anything to be rid of. I am drowning. There are shapes moving above me. I am convinced I am underwater, and these are fish, perhaps sharks. But then I discern Lana's face, and it is a wreck of terror as she tells me something I can't hear. I believe she is saying I have to live, and that she loves me, but she has to leave me. Even preoccupied with physical suffering, I find this profoundly sad. I would cry, and I wonder what happens to tears underwater. I drift in and out of alternative realities. One moment I am deep in that sordid sea, silt sifting softly over me, smothering me, and then I am dreaming, on a train, searching for Lana, and when I move from carriage to carriage until I eventually come to the driver, who is both my father and Uncle Kenneth, and the cab is tipping down into a black lake. I cannot stop myself from screaming, or at least I think I am screaming. I certainly try, but I realize I am unable to make a sound because I cannot take in air so as to let it back out again. Dreams are frightening, but they are a respite from the abominable torture of consciousness. Later, there are people around me, ramming spikes and tubes into me. My next memory is of travelling at speed through the green water, but I don't know if this is a dream or real. There are faces looking grim and businesslike, and then a man smiles at me, and I recognise him as a hospital porter, and amongst the din and racket I hear him saying, "I am profoundly sorry, Elliot." I want to say, "You can shout abracadabra and put it all right," but I cannot speak. Every part of me screams to him for help. Chapter 24. Summer 2020. It is a cold but bright Saturday morning in April, and we are at Tynemouth Market, trawling through the stalls on the station platforms. It has become a tradition on any weekend when Lana is not working, which is more often in the winter, less so in summer. We meet up with Rosie and Tom, who are regulars there, and Sarah and Tilly. Our friends are collectors. Rosie looks out for Victorian jewellery, while Tom goes over each stall assiduously for local postcards. Lana has started collecting Moorcroft pottery, examples of which are threatening to overwhelm every surface in the house. Sarah and Tilly have a passion for old children's toys, which fascinates our daughters, Beatty and Lottie. Our 2 girls love the market. They are 7 and 8, and they always come away with something quirky or offbeat, either at a bargain price or bought for them by our friends. Another regular, Gail, says everything passes through Tynemouth Market at some point in its existence, and no one who knows it would disagree. Lana buys bread from a school friend recently back home after years living in New Zealand. They have plenty to talk about, and I usually chat to a fellow called Ben, who has an almost impenetrable accent, to my southern ears. Lana and I still keep up our allotment, and Ben is an encyclopedia of gardening information. Life is treating me, Lana, and the girls well, and only that morning we have been told we can collect the dog that Beatty and Lottie have been begging us for since we found the collie roaming lost on Saltburn Beach and took it to the RSPCA. The ancient and grumbling Murakami must adapt, but I am confident we will all continue to fit comfortably into our house on Sapphire Street. As I am talking to Ben about potatoes, Beatty and Lottie go off with their mother, but then I see the stall at the far end of the platform where a young black man and an older woman stand wearing long white robes. They look completely out of place, although they are attempting to be welcoming. "God bother us," says Ben, when he sees me staring at them. They display a banner stating, "He is risen," and they are being ignored by everyone. There are a few words underneath the headline that are small and difficult to read at a distance, but I think I can guess what they are. I pay for a packet of seeds and thank Ben for his advice, then wander over and confirm the robed couple represent the Children of the Cross. I pick up and put down a book that shows the face of Brother Gilbert, and instead I take a leaflet. Prominent is a photo of Philip Odowiecki. "He has returned, then?" I ask warily. "He has never been away," says the young man, whose voice is low and pleasant and accentless. "I mean Philip Odowiecki." "So do I. You have heard of the Children of the Cross?" "Yes, I came across your church a few years ago. I met Philip." "Really?" asks the woman. "In person?" "I met him twice, once at the St. Michael's retreat at Ullswater, and later at Bethel in Faring, Sweden." "You were indeed blessed." "I'm not sure that's the word I'd use. Both times he made rather a hasty exit." "In what way?" "But the young man has misunderstood me. It is probably the only time I have ever said anything that has resulted in such an expression of awe." "You were there when he was taken up into heaven?" "If that's where he went." "Has he come back?" "Yes, at all times he is around us and within us," says the woman. "I mean physically. He manifests himself in many ways, always doing good work, promoting love, peace, understanding." "Stop," I say. "Would I be able to have a conversation with him here and now?" "You must believe he is listening, and in your heart you will hear his answer." "Please don't waste my time." I am becoming annoyed with her. "I met Philip and talked to him and his disciples. I discussed with him whether he was Christ come again or if he was mistaken. He is Christ. If I asked, could you give me his address?" "No," says the man, putting his hand up to silence his colleague. "Philip first came to earth to save us in 1962. He founded the Children of the Cross in 1986 in Calabar, Nigeria. But in 2001, he gathered around him his disciples. There was a giant conflagration, and they were all taken up into heaven. Miraculously, he returned in 2006 to Ullswater, here in the United Kingdom, and we heard the great news. He was with his chosen disciples, but he decided it was still not the perfect moment. His people were not pure enough at heart, and so Philip and his disciples were taken up into heaven for a second time. There they dwelt at the right hand of his Father for another 5 years before returning again in 2011 to Sweden. But for a third time the people were not ready to meet God, and again Philip was taken up into heaven. Bishop Gilbert was the single disciple left behind, and he returned to Calabar to tell us what had taken place. His gospel now informs our lives. He is our teacher as we await the next return of our one true leader, Philip Odowiecki. "Brother Gilbert was promoted to bishop, was he?" I say. "Did you know there were 2 other survivors in 2011? The odd couple frown. "My wife and I were there in Sweden. Bishop Gilbert only mentions the Blessed Vincent and the Blessed Gabriel." "Does Bishop Gilbert mention what Philip did to Brother Gabriel?" "No. What was that?" I am about to tell them, but Lana is suddenly at my side with our girls, and she says, "Fucking hell, the Children of the Cross." She realizes she has sworn and looks down at Beatty and Lottie. "Naughty, Mummy. I shouldn't have said that word. It was very wrong of me." The girls look at each other in mock shock and giggle. The representatives of the Children of the Cross smile beatifically at the result. I say, I was telling these two we were there when Vince and Gilbert were taken up into heaven with Philip. I don't want to discuss any of that, says Lana. Can we go? Okay, I say, but just one question. And I turn to the couple behind the table. I have always been aware there were regular intervals between Philip's previous appearances, and so I ask, were you expecting your leader to return in 2016? The young man has the honesty to look uncomfortable, while the woman says, from 2016, Bishop Gilbert says Philip's return could be at any moment. I have faith, sir, says the man with pride. As do I, says the woman. But I do not believe you were there when Philip was taken up into heaven. Bishop Gilbert would have mentioned you. Elliot, I'm leaving, insists Lana. The metro is due in. And she starts to walk away with the girls. I say to the Children of the Cross as steadily as I can, I met a man who could clap his hands together and sweep himself and his followers clean off the face of the earth, causing them to reappear years later in a different part of the world. I met an angel who was able to make time stand still. But you are not a believer, asks the woman. Your faith, I say, is a belief in something that cannot be seen or touched, and for which there is no empirical proof. It defies logic and understanding and common sense, and yet you ask people to believe you are right, somehow on a spiritual plane. Or, at the very least, you ask them to respect your beliefs, mad or mistaken though they may appear to others. That is right, says the young man. Well, I have seen miracles performed. I have been presented with evidence for the marvelous, but I choose not to believe. I ask you to respect my lack of belief, mad or mistaken though it may seem to you. He nods, and I say, if you see Philip, tell him Elliot and Lana remember what he did to Brother Gabriel. I have to push through the crowd to catch up with Lana, Lottie and Beatty. The metro arrives noisily, and I just board in time, and we are all able to sit together. From the window seat, Lana asks sarcastically, Did you show them the scar on your chest as proof of what happened? And then she looks out, back to where the Children of the Cross have their stall. Why are they here? I don't know, I say, and I am about to add that Philip is not with them, but Lottie interrupts. Who were those people in the white dresses? I don't want to talk about them, says Lana, and she closes her eyes, looking tired, resting her head against the glass as the metro jolts and moves off. What do they believe in? Lottie persists, irritated that her mother is ignoring her. Lana finds Lottie's interest in Christianity annoying, but she was the one who made a fuss about getting the girls into the local C of E school. I've already upset the headmistress by explaining comparative religion to our daughters. Daddy, Lottie asks me, as her mother will not answer, what do they believe in? Oh, the usual dull pantomime, I say, starring God, Christ, and angels. I am distracted because I am reminded of a night many years ago, long before the girls were born, when Lana and I had travelled back on the train from Middlesbrough after a night out with Rosie and Tom. She had laid her head against the window then, her eyes closed, and I had stared at her and had appreciated how lovely she was. I wonder, idly, what happened to the red dress and the choker necklace she had worn. These days she never puts on false eyelashes and heavy makeup, but at this moment she is more attractive than she has ever been. There are small wrinkles around her eyes and at the edge of her mouth that never used to be there. There are the faint lines of a frown on her forehead, but her beauty is intoxicating, and I fall in love with her all over again. And what do you believe in? Asks Lottie. Sorry, I say, not having heard her. Lana still has her eyes closed, as though ignoring us. What do you believe in? Our daughter asks me again. Lana says sleepily, That, Lottie, is a very good question. I believe in us, I say, and the life we lead in our house on Sapphire Street.